town and High Garden. Hopefully, he could avoid traveling to the Reach personally. Ned disliked the thought of extending his trip much longer than necessary. Renly and Laura's returned with lunch in tow. Ned ate lightly, and once it was appropriate, the Northmen took their leave. Roose appeared satisfied, and Ricard was happy for the compliments Ned paid him. Despite old tensions with both the Boltons and Dustins, nothing united the Lords of the North like gaining the upper hand on the Andals. // Ned's optimistic thoughts died on the vine. Life was not a song. Robert's good moods and tolerance ran out within a few months. Denied his feast and tourney due to John Arryn's declining health, Robert declared one morning, without warning Stannis or Ned, that he was going on a hunt. It was abysmal timing. Stannis had left a few days earlier, called back to Dragonstone to sort out damages from a recent storm, severe enough to warrant the Hand's attention. Ned, as the only remaining advisor to the king, was forced to remain in the city to resolve disputes. 3 days later, panicked cries filled the Red Keep. Sir Barristan hauled Robert back from the forest, leaking his lifeblood. Ned could only stand by and watch the Maestas rush to stanch the wound as his friend was fed milk of the poppy. Sir Barristan was devastated, the king was barely conscious, the queen was elusive, and Ned was exhausted. The Baratheon men that Stannis had not taken with him now answered to Renly, and day by day, more of the royal fleet slipped away. His ravens to Stannis now went unanswered. Moore was restless, and his lords reported altercations with the city watch. He ordered the northern soldiers to keep to themselves. Roose and Morrick Flint ensured a band of their men was permanently stationed on one of the city gates. After another day of tiresome and frustrating arguments, Ned had returned to his quarters. An unwelcome visitor met him. "Lord Varys," Ned said, staring at the bald man lurking in the shadows of his dining room. Lord Stark Varys greeted, "I apologize for the intrusion. There were matters that simply could not wait." For a moment, Ned's heart skipped a beat, a number of fears rushed to his mind. Varys glided softly to the fireplace. "The king and Lord Arryn are stable for the moment," the Master of Whispers reassured him. "I have news of a more worrying sort." Varys turned and paused at the look on Ned's face. He was startled back to reality and took a seat. "Petter Baelish has been moved from the Red Cells," Varys said. Ned slammed a fist on the oak table. "On whose orders?" he demanded. "The Queen's," Varys replied. "Sir Jaime Lannister met with Baelish twice while the king was on his hunt. I'm unsure of what they discussed. Whatever Baelish said convinced Queen Cersei to send urgent letters to her father and uncle." Ned grit his teeth. "You withheld this information. Why?" Varys clicked his tongue. "You are a trusted advisor, but you are not Hand of the King, Lord Stark. I was awaiting Lord Stannis' return, but as the current Hand is still absent, I felt compelled to seek you out. Is there anything else you feel compelled to share? Several Crown landlords have been summoned to the keep. The Queen has some great matter she wishes to broach with them," Varys added. Ned's spine straightened. Great matter. He disliked the look in Varys' eyes. A man who heard too much knew too much but said very little. What other secrets did he know? Perhaps the most pressing one. "Tomorrow, I will seek out Lord Renly. With his support, we can keep the city stable until Stannis returns," Ned decided. Varys nodded and walked to the chamber door. Before he left, he turned back. "I should warn you, my lord. Lord Renly has made plans to depart the city soon, and my little birds say that Lord Stannis has not stirred from Dragonstone, nor does he plan to." Varys left Ned in the darkness. // What a wretched king I've been. A fool, a drunkard. Will they say I was as bad as Aes? The last words of his dear friend had been somber. Robert finally woke after days under the influence of the poppy. One last bout of strength, Pycelle called it. The demon of the trident wallowed in his bloody bed, unable to even see his foster father one last time. The Grand Maester had declared it, and a messenger was sent to the Great September. The rest of the realm would soon know, King Robert Baratheon was dead. A few hours after the Silent Sisters had come for the body, Ned sat in the Tower of the Hand, working through several missives. The door to the office was thrown open, and Renly Baratheon marched in, clad in fine riding leathers and mail. Renly. Ned stood. Jon Arryn is dead, Renly said. I must go to him, Ned mumbled and took off down the stairs. Domeric and Donal on his heels. He practically sprinted down the hallways, brushing past servants and guards. At the door to Jon's chambers, he saw a mass of Valymen, all hunched forward. Let me through! Ned cried, pushing past the mourners. The chamber was crowded, but kneeling at the bedside was Sir Egon and Quinn. Ned staggered and slumped against the sheets. His hand desperately grasped for Jon's cold fingers. Jon's face was twisted in pain, his mouth curled. Before questions or tears could pass his lips, Sir Egon stood and leaned to Ned's ear. Lord Stark, the maid found his lips stained black. Egon whispered, a malignant rage in his words. A deadly clarity fell onto Ned's mind. His devastation crested like a wave over a rock, and though the torrent of pain raged, sense returned to him. He saw Renly enter at a more sedate pace. Ned took a final moment to lean forward and pressed a gentle kiss to Jon's forehead. Loudly, for the benefit of the room, Ned said, "Send for the Silent Sisters and assemble his household. Arrangements must be made to send young Robert back to the Vale," Ned ordered. "Who is watching over the young falcon?" he asked. Egon and Quinn paled. All color fled from their faces as they desperately looked over the mass of guards in the chamber. In their haste to see Jon Arryn, the guards had abandoned their posts. With nary a word, all three of them were rushing out. Robin's room was closer to the infirmary, so the Grand Maester could attend him whenever he had time. A woman's screams echoed in the hall. Ned threw himself around the last corner. The Hound stood outside Robin's door, restraining a hysterical Lysa Arryn. The woman was madly clawing out and thrashing with her whole body. Her rage was directed at Prince Joffrey, pressed against the wall with blood streaming from cuts on his cheeks and lips. "Monster!" Lysa shrieked, "Monster!" At the sight of Ned and the Valymen, Joffrey shouted, "Take her to the dungeons." A band of red cloaks surged forward and took Lysa from the Hound, who all followed Joffrey as he fled deeper into the keep, towards Maegor's Holdfast. Ned nearly gave chase but remembered why they had run all this way. He followed Egon into Robin's quarters. They were too late. No black lips stained Jon Arryn's son. Instead, the boy laid slack, his face a dull red. His hair was mussed, and a pillow lay fallen on the floor. No heartbeat filled his chest. Quinn fell to his knees, he slammed his hands to the floor over and over. Egon threw his helmet against the wall with a scream. Ned was silent, his anger churned, his heart hammered, and he felt detached. The rest of the guard followed swiftly. Renly grasped Ned's shoulder. Even Baratheon's imperious attitude cracked at the sight of the dead child. "Lord Stark Eddard, we cannot stay here. The Queen is making her move. She has the red cloaks, and with Baelish free, she has the gold cloaks. We cannot stay here, see sense." Renly pleaded. Ned spit back, "Do not speak to me of sense." Renly pulled his hand back. "Egon, prepare the bodies and gather your party. We will get you out of the city," Ned commanded. "I'll send a runner to have my men at the docks leave through the mud gate. Renly, the Locks, and Dustins are manning the King's Gate today. They will hold the gate open if the Queen orders otherwise." With a firm slap on the back, Ned pushed Quinn into action. The Baratheon and Stark parties were frantically packing for a swift departure in quick order. He sent Domeric and Donal to spread the word and 50 men down to the stables to prepare horses. The Queen must have been preoccupied with her son and Lysa. The red cloaks that troubled them were easily intimidated, and the King's Guard was nowhere to be seen. As the last of the supplies were loaded, Sir Kyle Condon ran into the courtyard. "Lord Stark, the Queen has announced that Prince Joffrey will be crowned king today." Ned thought of Robert's will, tucked in with his other documents. He'd been hesitant to present it to the court without speaking to Jon first. What good would it do now? Mounting his horse, Ned ensured his men were all accounted. "We make for the King's Gate," Ned shouted. With haste, the small folk in the streets parted for them. Ned could only hope that Donal, Ricard, and Farrow made it to safety and rejoined them outside the walls. When they passed the mud gate, he saw the portcullis dropped. The clash of swords carried on the wind from River Road. Battle raged at the King's Gate. Roose fought from horseback beside Lord Condon and the Flints. Domeric stood near a fallen horse fending off Lannister men. Coming from the side streets, Renly and Salores led Tyrell and Baratheon men against a mass of city watchmen. Ned drew his sword and charged in, cutting into red-cloaked necks. The melee was bloody, but Ned and his men steadily forced the red cloaks off River Road and into the alleys. With the main way cleared, Garrus Sawin blew his cavalry horn, and as one, the two groups surged out of the King's Gate and onto the Gold Road. With all speed, they followed the road west and crossed Blackwater Bridge. From there, Ned had little choice but to follow Renly and the Tyrell men south to the Rosa Road. Sunset arrived, allowing them to stop for a rest. In the distance, Ned saw the towers of a castle and guessed they had reached Tumbleton on the eastern Mandaya. After assuring that they'd left no one behind, Ned and his commanders gathered at Renly's makeshift fire. The Lord of Storm's End stood and laughed. "Well done, Eddard. A heroic escape, just the sort of thing to get the bards singing." "I thank you for your aid and your warning, Renly, you as well," Salores Ned said. Renly shrugged off the appreciation. "I should be thanking you and your men. It was Lord Bolton and Lord Locke's swordsmen that took control of the gate and stopped its closure." Renly turned to the Northmen and pointed to the rations being handed out. "Please, take enough food for your men. I was unsure if you'd be able to secure enough provisions." Ned motioned the men to the task. Renly beckoned him over to a log, and they sat near the fire. "I assume you will be heading to Storm's End?" Ned asked. "Word will reach Stannis swiftly. We must marshal our forces for when your brother makes his claim." Rather than an enthusiastic agreement, Renly frowned. "Lord Stark," Renly uttered, "we aren't going to Storm's End." "I don't understand," Ned said. "Our destination is Highgarden." The fire burned intensely at their feet. Silence stretched between the two men. Ned was speechless. "You would run?" Ned couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. "Not running," Renly countered, "preparing. With Robert dead and Joffrey, a bastard, the realm needs a king that can unite it. That king is not Stannis." The full horror of Renly's words dawned on Ned. "You are forsaking your vows and the laws. Succession is clear, Stannis is Robert's heir, and you after him," Ned insisted. "Stannis has no chance at winning the throne," Renly said. "I have the Reach and the Stormlands." He glanced back at the knot of Valyman guarding the shrouded forms of the last Arryns. "With some clever words, I'll have the Vale too." Ned saw Salores and 3 other knights step into the firelight. "With your aid, Eddard, I can have the North and the Riverlands." "What will Tywin Lannister do then? With all of Westeros set against his monstrous grandson?" Renly wondered. "Stannis is the rightful king," Ned growled. "According to the law, so was Aes." Renly dismissed. "I will not abide by this," Ned declared and stood defiantly. Loras made to draw his blade, but Renly hastily shoved his former squire's hands away. "No harm will come to any Northman," Renly said. "Lord Stark, I'm afraid you're outnumbered. In the morning, 200 knights will arrive from Long Table." Ned gazed out and realized the younger man spoke true. The flags of the Reach and Stormlands outnumbered the Northern. Here in the heartland of the ancient Gardener kings, Ned was at the mercy of the Rose and Stag. Renly stood at the heart of their disloyal union. He could feel more hidden in the shadows just behind him. It would be easy, Ned thought, to order his wolf forward. To tear out Renly's throat, cut down one of the knights, and then command his men to flee into the darkness. A sliver of his savage desire shone in his eyes. Renly swallowed and laid a hand on his blade. Ned could not bring himself to do it. Perhaps the hungry wolf or Brandon Ice could have shed blood that night and added another song to their grim legacies, but the quiet wolf would not. "Very well," Ned resigned, "I shall go with you in peace." Renly relaxed and told Loras to return to his dinner. The other knights remained. "I only ask," Ned added, "that some of my soldiers accompany the Valyman. If you mean to sway their liege lords, then my word will carry weight." Renly acquiesced and thankfully left Ned alone by the fire, taking his knights with him. Roose and Domeric sat down soon after. They joined in his brooding when Ned revealed their newfound status as hostages. Domeric stood to inform the rest of their force and ensure no one panicked. Roose was quiet. No doubt, he would spend the night thinking and give counsel tomorrow with a fresh mind. "What happened to your man, Wispin?" Ned asked. Roose cut the last piece of his meat from the bone, following at a distance. I'll cut loose one of the horses for him with your permission. He can be in Riverrun before the week is out. Perhaps Ned should look into finding his men like Wispin. Loyal men who knew the skills of a cut purse and skulk. Where's your direwolf? Roose asked. Ned pointed behind him. Roose looked over his shoulder and jerked forward, dropping his meal into the dirt. Ned held back a smile. Moore's eyes shone like candles in the grass. Moore retreated into the field with a push of thought, intent on hunting his dinner. Roose regained his composure quicker than most. Another war, Ned said. Roose reached down and threw the dirty pork into the fire. It was inevitable. Ned watched the meat blacken and crisp, slowly burning to ash. Winter is coming, Roose. We shall do our best to make this short. If blood must be spilled, let it be spilled quickly. I have had enough of these games. Stannis or Renly, whoever sits the throne, in the end, will owe us a debt, and they shall pay it. Roose turned, and the shadows on his gaunt face were a strange comfort to Ned's dark thoughts. Well said, Ned. Well said. The following day, the knights arrived as Renly promised. Sir Egan was confused, Quinn offended, by Renly's ruling. Ned bade them return to the Lords of the Vale. Morrick and his flint host joined them, carrying a personal letter from Ned, addressed to Bronze Yohn Royce. Of course, Renly inspected his letter before sealing. He saw nothing amiss. Robert would have thought Ned insane, and Bronze Yohn would have been confused. Ned's letter included a personal anecdote, purportedly to prove the letter was genuinely from his hand. The story described a conflict between the raiders of the mountain tribes, where Ned and Jon Arryn came across one of the Eaglemen poisoned by the wife of his dear friend, Black Boar, after the pecking bird revealed the Eagleman's hidden camp. The Eagleman's son was also killed in the attack. Ned implored Bronze Yohn to recall the chaos among the tribes in the aftermath and avoid that tumult now and march to the true king with all haste. The message could have been more subtle, but the hidden meaning would hopefully convince Yohn that Renly's letter was mainly true. If nothing else, the Lannisters' poisoning of Jon Arryn and the mysterious death of Robert Arryn would rouse the Vale against King Joffrey. Their force made good time along the western road to Highgarden. Ned's worries curdled and twisted as they approached the seat of House Tyrell. A sweat-soaked messenger ran from the gates before Renly could introduce him formally to the Lord Paramount of the Reach. Lord Baratheon. Lord Baratheon. The boy, some Tyrell cousin by his garb, shouted, Tywin Lannister has marched from Casterly Rock. Renly clapped his hands. I knew the old lion wouldn't sit idle. Tell us, where has he gone? Riverrun. Renly's smile faded. Ned could only stand tall against the cold dread that gripped his heart. Starks had come south, and once again, tragedy hounded their every step. // Chapter 33, Warm Their Hearts, Part 1. Chapter text. Grey Wind. Calm down. Robb shouted, desperately trying to grab his companion's attention. The large direwolf was more interested in a wrestling match with Ghost. The three of them had caused Robb nothing but headaches since Green Eyes followed his parents south. Bourne had done his best to keep the animals in check while he, Jon and Sansa focused on managing Winterfell. Needless to say, with the wolves finally reaching physical maturity, Bourne had his hands full. Jon, call back Ghost. Robb yelled to his brother. Robb slipped in the mud trying to separate the dogs while Jon, the smug ass, was laughing alongside Val. Robb could see the humor in the situation. All the Stark children had been stressed by the past months, some levity was a welcome sight. The North's requests and problems didn't pause just because the Lord of Winterfell was absent. They arrived by raven and foot, looking to Robb for fair judgment. Sansa had stepped into their mother's shoes with plenty of help from Jane, Beth and surprisingly Daisy Mormont. It was an unfair judgment to think because the heiress of Bear Island wore a mace, that she had abandoned all other skills. Jon had also taken a share of the load. He ventured down to Wintertown frequently to manage affairs among the influx of new occupants. The vast majority of the Wolf Canal laborers had left for their next destinations, but a sizable number of families and craftsmen had set up semi-permanent business near Winterfell. It got Jon out of the castle, usually with Val in tow. Few petty matters survived her wit and words, which opened the way for Jon to settle the arguments peacefully. Val took pity on Robb, now with dirt up to his knees, and whistled a loud tune. Ghost pivoted on his heels and made a dash for the couple, leaving Grey Wind to turn his pounce on Crag, who'd been having a nice nap by the pool in the Godswood. Rob's morning prayers had been interrupted by the wolves' arrival, John and Val not far behind. The feast at Last Hearth was only a few weeks away and preparations were nearly completed for their journey. Bourne was wrapping up his business in Wintertown while Sansa was giving final directions to the servants taking over her regular duties. Originally, Sansa, Daisy and the Karstarks were going to Last Hearth alone. Word of the celebration had spread through the castle and once it was explained to Val, she insisted on attending. John had been hesitant to ask Sansa but their sister had jumped at the idea and asked Bourne and Marie to come as well. Robb felt secure enough to shoulder being the only Stark in Winterfell. Lord Sewin had come for an extended visit and Maester Lewin would be staying behind. Robb wouldn't lack for counsel. The last message from Father had placed them near the Trident. That had been sent a few weeks ago. Father would have arrived in the capital by now. He guessed that a lengthy letter from Mother was on its way from Riverrun. Leaping forward, Robb wrangled an arm around Grey Wind's neck. The wolf was nearly too large to trap in a headlock but Robb managed it. He cursed in the old tongue the whole time but Grey Wind belatedly realized it was time to rest. Robb wiped off the dirt and dust as he left the Godswood for the front gate. He smiled widely at the sight of Alis carefully fixing her mare's saddle. Grey Wind sauntered forward to catch her attention. "What have you been doing, Grey?" Alis asked the wolf, picking a few red leaves from his pelt. Grey Wind shoved his snout into her pockets, searching for some treats no doubt. "Nothing for you there, boy," Alis told him. Robb joined her and threaded their fingers together as Alis indulged Grey Wind with pets. "You all right?" Robb asked. Alis caught his eye and shyly smiled. "I'll have a letter ready before we even arrive, I'm sure." Robb cast a quick look at the rest of the men and women preparing their horses in the courtyard. Sir Roderick would be leading the escort personally while Jory took command of the castle. The old man was preoccupied with his saddlebags, allowing Robb to dart in for a quick kiss. Alis was thinking the same thing. She'd kept an eye on Daisy Mormont talking with Willis about a problem with her horseshoes. The future Lady Stark grabbed a fistful of Robb's copper hair and met him halfway. Robb reluctantly pulled away all too soon. "I shall miss you terribly," Robb told her. "These last weeks have been wonderful." Alis blushed then reached out to brush a few strands of her hair off his shoulder. "We have a few years yet before our marriage," Alis reminded him. "Plenty of time for more visits." "Plenty of time for you to outthink me, you mean?" Alis laughed, thinking back on their evenings of riddles and games. She and Sansa held the current 6-day winning streak. "Father asked that I return to Carhold after the celebration," Alis added. "Mother cajoled him into reviewing the Winter Fund and Torrhen fumbles his sums no matter how slow he writes." Robb nodded with a frown. "I imagine I'll be just as busy." Another batch of messages arrived yesterday. House Liddell finished their peak markings. Lewin and I will need at least a week to bring them in line with all the other measurements. Alis kneeled down to give Grey Wind his final scratches. "Also, Harry took your last letter to heart. When he was a child, our grandmother used to tell stories about old folk on the Grey Cliffs tasting winter on the breeze. He's been riding up and down the coast, visiting hamlets and homesteads, looking for elders willing to walk the cliffside. If anyone can convince an ancient Nan to go for a stroll, it would be Harry on. He mentioned Shepherd Dewin has all of Hilltop in a rush. She convinced Alderman Beck to build another root cellar and to finally have the mill repaired. Harry also sent Torrhen off to find out why our great-uncle Arnulf hasn't been sending his extra stores to Carhold. It's almost like everyone knows something is coming, but no one can agree on what to do first." Alis looked up to see Robb staring into the overcast sky, his thinking frown firmly in place. She knew the coming winter weighed heavily on his mind, more so with Lord Stark so far away. He was determined to prepare their kingdom for the harsh snows. Winterfell sent requests to every corner of the north for measurements, guesses, old stories and habits. Alis' mother, Relin, had been rightly concerned when her daughter wrote home about Lord Stark's intense interest in forecasting the end of summer. The Lady of Carhold even reached out to her estranged kin at Widow's Watch. Whatever response was returned, it had roused her mother, hence Carhold's winter fund being re-examined from top to bottom. Sir Roderick called out and the riders began to assemble. Rob helped Alis into her saddle. He made the final rounds, bidding goodbye to his family and thanking the escort for their dedication. His final words were solely for Alis. He softly kissed her knuckles, opened her hand, then pressed a smaller mole into her palm. "I'll be waiting for you," Rob told her. "The world seems so much clearer with you nearby." That final word filled Alis with a deep happiness. What she would now say for certain was love. Their party set off along the path, wheeling onto the King's Road, following the White Knife north. Sansa rode up beside Alis and peered down at the amulet, now tied around her wrist. Alis ignored her friend's chuckles and pointed looks. "Can I help you, Sansa?" she asked. No, Sansa demurred. "I just thought you should know that Rob's act of romance has made Jon very jealous." "Which one?" Alis asked. "Small Jon is already planning out his carving," Sansa told her. "As for my brother." The two women looked back to see Val and Jon riding side by side. Jon Snow had always appeared despondently shy. As a young girl, Alis wondered if Rob's brother was mute. This past visit to Winterfell, she'd heard Jon speak more than the last dozen years combined. Val herself had little patience for meekness. She evidently enjoyed pushing Jon into boldness. To be fair, once Val cracked the man's shell, Jon Snow would eagerly rise to her challenge. The Skagga woman had a way of making the bastard of Winterfell forget the strict manners he awkwardly imposed on himself. Alis was almost tempted to try and push Rob to passion once or twice, maybe once they were wed. Jon's infatuation with Val was obvious. Alis thought it was charming how he went out of his way to make her feel comfortable. Skagos was quite the remote place and shepherds were odd folk at the best of times. It was understandable that a noble castle was new ground to her. Alis knew Winterfell's staff had gossiped about the pair. Eddard Stark's second son disappeared off to the east, only to return with his cousins, a weirwood marks and fair young woman. Lord Stark had not made any announcements of betrothal. The staff guessed they were quietly courting until Jon's status as Lord of the Gift was secured. She couldn't imagine a bold woman like Val waiting very long to marry. It would be interesting to see the reactions to the gift's return at the celebration. Last Hearth was bound to be busy regardless. An event focused on the younger generation of the North was a new concept and Sansa had painstakingly combed through her archives for all sorts of interesting traditions to introduce. The North hadn't held a large, stable court since the days of King Torrhen. Harvest feasts had become the main vehicle for young nobles to meet and mingle outside of singular visits between lords. Many families were sending representatives and a slew of older relatives would be chaperoning. Alis was mentally readying herself for the various conversations the other heirs would drag her into. Even a so-called casual feast like this would be rife with drama. She wondered if any of the ladies would set their eyes on Jon Snow. More than a fair share of minor lords would draw steel for the right to help start the new branch of House Stark. If nothing else, it would be worth the hassle to see Val's response to any new competition. Alis wondered if Sansa and Small Jon would be willing to bet on who lost their temper first, Val at some pretty lady dancing with Jon. Or Jon when a lordling decided to try charming Val. // With the northern mountains at their backs, they veered east after passing Long Lake. Last Hearth was not the largest castle in the north. By a measure of sheer area, Winterfell cleanly held the title. Sansa, however, thought Last Hearth deserved to be called the grandest. To her eyes it outshone even the seat of House Lannister. Of course, she had never been to Casterly Rock, only read descriptions and seen sketches. Like Casterly Rock, Last Hearth rested upon Glamour, which was no mountain, it was a massive hill that rose out of the roaring forest, north of the last river. Sheer rock laid across the hill's north and western face, bracketing the sloped earth that fell from the top down to the southern tip which was bordered by a deep stream. At its foot was the Umber's main township, Chain House. A walled settlement that was more heavily defended than most villages so close to a large keep. Sansa knew that small folk this close to the wall were wary of living anywhere in the open. Last Hearth itself encompassed the top of Glamour. 7 huge halls encircled a single tall keep. Unlike Winterfell, Last Hearth was mainly built from wood except for 2 walls that spanned the hill path leading from Chain House up to the castle. These were wrought from thick mountain stone. A gift from an Arryn woman who won the hand of an Umber lord when Small Jon's ancestors still claimed to be kings of the Bay. The first time she saw it, Sangza was struck by the picturesque vista. All those years ago, the sun had risen on the horizon and its beams spilled across the wooden buildings, giving the entire feature a warm glow, so unlike the grey coloring of Winterfell. The light fell across the cliff face and the stone face sparkled, as if jewels were hewn into the caves and cracks. Smalljan had blushed like a red rose when Sangza waxed poetic about the sight. Great Jon had been brought to tears when she sang her first song about the castle. A giant's garnet was now a staple of House Umber's feasts. No doubt Smalljan would convince her to sing it for the celebration. Chain House was quiet, apart from a few people calling out greetings to her and Smalljan. They were the first noble party to arrive and no doubt last Hearth's steward, Hodder Umber, was busy preparing. Judging by the small group waiting at the foot of Glamour, their approach was anticipated. Sangza smiled and greeted Oma and her younger sister, Elma, while Lady Tylar pulled her son into a gentle embrace. A comical sight, since Lady Tylar was only a few inches shorter than Smalljan. People who thought the size of her betrothed came solely from his father were mistaken. Smalljan once confided that the Great Jon noticed his wife because she towered over the other ladies at every feast. After Smalljan had gone to bed, Oma had whispered that her father was looking for a bride he wouldn't smother in his sleep. Lady Sangza, we are overjoyed to see you return, Lady Tylar said. It's always a pleasure, my Lady Sangza replied. You know Lady Alis Carstock, Lord Eddard Carstock, and Lady Daisy Mormont. I'd like to formally introduce you to my half-brother, Lord John, my cousins Born and Marie Wolftongue and their companion, Val of Skagos. The shepherds, including Val, were given a respectful nod. Lady Tylar was polite, especially to Sangza's brother. No doubt Smalljan had already written to his parents about the new title. Sangza would need to carefully inquire to the Umber's thoughts on not being granted the gift themselves. She did notice John having a heated conversation with Val just out of earshot. John gestured sharply at the ground then back down the hill. The two locked eyes. Val nodded and laid a hand across her chest. Sangza. Smalljan called. She turned away from the private moment and joined Smalljan on the path to the family hall. Her mind focused firmly on the impending festivities. // Welcome, lords and ladies. The Great Jon boomed. All our guests have arrived, Last Hearth is grateful to host you. The feasting hall was awash in torchlight. The Umber's main hall was heavily decorated, centuries-old carvings climbed the pillars, the walls were adorned with splintered shields and ragged banners, large tables bordered a huge cooking pit, a hog roasting over it, and a throne sat at the back of the hall, a squat chair of bronze with an impractically large greatsword sunk and chained to the floor acting as the backrest. Sangza and John sat beside the Umbers at the head table. A good 80 people filled out the rest of the banquet. Their guests ranged from older heirs like Darren Hornwood and Daisy Mormont to younger representatives, a large group of Knots and Buckleys from the mountains, many of House Carstock's masterly families, House Umber's vassals, and a surprisingly large party of Bolton vassals. Sworn swords and older cousins and uncles filled out the rest of the seats. Everyone had spent the past few days making awkward introductions, igniting old rivalries or forging fast friendships. Sangza had assigned Smalljan and his cousins to roam the castle and keep the peace. He broke up no less than 3 fist fights, 1 wrestling match and 6 different improper encounters. The lack of supervision outside of a scant few older relatives was too tempting for a few of the young nobles. Before we begin, I will allow Lady Sangza Stark to speak. The Great Jon gestured for Sangza to stand. She carefully straightened her dress. The attention of the entire hall was nerve-wracking, but Sangza had performed before enough crowds that she pushed past her own discomfort. As we open this celebration, I hope you all take this chance to meet your neighbors, near and distant. I speak for my father, Lord Stark, when I say that the North, now more than ever, must be united. United in strength, hearts, and mind. Together, we have weathered 300 years of the dragon, the invasion of the Andals, and before that, the long night itself, Sangza said, her tone serious, words echoing beneath the rustic walls. This summer has been long and for the most part peaceful. The winds are changing, when cold winds blow we must hold to each other to survive. The audience was then raptured. Their goblets left untouched, a few of the mountain clans had even clasped their hands over medallions and emeralds dangling from their necks. She saw the skepticism in a few faces. Sansa had carefully prepared her opening speech with Jon, Born and Marie. If she was going to be the Lady of Last Hearth, she would need a good relationship with the mountain clans and the Karstark neighbors. She knew her Tully blood would cause some amount of discomfort. The fact that her mother followed the Seven was enough reason for the more devout Northmen to mistrust her. Sansa needed to establish herself as a true Northwoman before her peers. To put a new story on their tongues when her name came up in their circles. Let night come, let the enemy draw their steel. We shall gather around our fires and bear our bronze. Those who seek to conquer us shall hear the echoes of our wolves. Those who seek our friendship will feast at our sides. The summer was long and now the sun wanes. We who sit here now are the future, one day the burdens of our family will rest on our shoulders. We shall strive to be worthy of it. Winter is coming. She could see the hall react to her speech. It was apparently inspiring, Robb had convinced her of that fact. The real test would be to recite it again. Yos not there, yos otter hero hal. Farfinner are you sol, door hero era. Ottern vinner duff an, eul bur duff lack fur alphen. Ottern vinner duff eighth, eul a dask fe get a hole. Sen mar ferd lank, sol dol ban. Winter duff coma. Sansa recited the old tongue in one strong breath. She'd stayed up over many evenings practicing the words, her rhythm and pronunciation. This was too important to interrupt with hesitant pauses or syllable corrections. Many were struck by her use of the ancient language. Despite Born's presence in Winterfell, signaling the shepherd's return to the heart of the north, Jon had learned on Skagos, that many houses were skeptical that the Starks had truly embraced the old traditions again. Lady Catelyn's background and her father's fostering in the Vale were stones around the Stark children's feet. Robb was even more pressured to prove himself a worthy future Warden of the North. If Sansa and Jon could convince the next set of lords and ladies, then Robb's task would be all the easier. For a split second, she feared the silence was proof she had failed. Her words sounded hollow to their ears and she would be forever labeled a failure, a trout trying to be a wolf, an Andal who didn't bell. Winter is coming. A woman with knot stitching cried. Winter is coming. Yelled a trio of lordlings from the lonely hills. Small Jon damn near leapt onto the table. Winter is coming. Great Jon slammed his mug to the table. Winter is coming. The whole hall erupted and the Great Jon's rumble called for the first course of the meal. Sansa had begun the celebration on the right foot, now she had to ensure it stayed the course. //////////// Chapter 34, Warm Their Hearts, Part 2. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Come on now, young man, don't leave us in suspense. Jon took a drink of his ale to avoid answering Great Jon's question. He'd been left at the head table when the dancing started. Sansa and Small Jon had opened the floor with Alis and her brother following. Now that they were both in their cups, the Great Jon had opened up a discussion about the gift. Jon got the sense the Umber was intensely curious about his plans for the new lands. I've settled on Ghoststark, Lord Umber Jon announced. He'd settled on his new title just days before departing Winterfell. Jon's brothers and sisters had come up with nearly 10 different names. They covered a variety of themes. Rickon had fought valiantly for Jon Stark while Arya and Bran bickered over whether Wallstark or Giftstark was superior. Sansa was more inclined to follow the traditional colors and suggested Blackstark to signify his connection to the Wall. Jon felt it was too close to Blackfyr. Robb had been adamant that Whitestark was a fine name. He pointed out that it avoided tripping over Greystark and Redstark. Though Robb conceded it may confuse Jon's lineage with the White Hills near the Wolf's Wood. Jon decided his new name should reflect something unique about him, just as the Karstarks were named after their founder. Ghost was his closest companion and he knew that the Silent Wolf was his most memorable feature. Mance and Dalla had even started calling Jon, Witchelf, White Wolf, when they felt like being clever. Thus, he settled on Ghoststark. His banner was still undecided. His bags held dozens of charcoal sketches. He knew his main color would be white, but he had no great deeds to his name, so the design was bare at the moment apart from some depiction of a white wolf with red eyes. Gratian smashed their mugs together, a fine name. The two went back to discussing the logistics of bringing the gift back into the northern trade routes. Lord Umber was only somewhat familiar with the lands. He promised to send word to Chain House, where some of the residents originally came from the gift. John would appreciate the chance to talk with them and learn the realities of his new holdings. "Have you spoken with Edwile yet?" Gratian asked. "Briefly, he and I agreed to spar sometime this week. We were both younger and less seasoned the last time we fought in Winterfell." Gratian smiled. "Edwile's got a good head on his shoulders, might not be the brightest of the bunch but he's got common sense trickling out his ears." John laughed appropriately. He picked up somewhat on the Gratian's undertones. Taking a risk, he decided to try and respond properly. "I know he enjoys visiting his cousins in the mountains. Has he spent much time in the gift?" "Roads and wildlings can't be left to themselves. He's made his fair share of trips to the wall, either taking prisoners your father sends or escorting the occasional wandering crow. I'll have to ask him about it. Maybe he won't be opposed to finding a more permanent home farther north," John implied. The Gratian smiled and toasted again. It seems John's first attempt at negotiating had passed muster. If he could bring Smalljohn's brother into his service, that would certainly smooth any future dealings. "Lord John!" a voice called. A woman his age stepped out of the crowd and approached the table. She was near his age and had chestnut hair done in two thick braids. Her dress had motifs of goats jumping over bushes. It took a moment, but John thought she came from the Lonely Hills, House Umber's most southern holdings. "Would you care to dance?" she asked. Before John could refuse, Gratian grabbed him by the neck of his tunic and stood him up. "Young John would be delighted, Lady Cull," Gratian shouted. Lady Cull took John by the hand and pulled him onto the dance floor. They joined the rhythm of the tune and were quickly swinging and stamping alongside the rest of the guests. At Sansa's insistence, John had brushed up on his dances before the feast, but he didn't expect to actually use them, only to find he spent the next hour on his feet. First was Lady Cull, then there was Lady Tot, then Lady Ben, and eventually the names blended together. John kept his partners straight by taking in their dresses. The Umber nobles wore heavy cloth embroidered with animal and plant motifs. The Mountain Clan women integrated small jewels to their hides, and most of the other guests had prominent family sigils on their person. Daisy Mormont even took his for a round when Eddard Karstark took a brief break. Stumbling off the dance floor, John avoided any eye contact and flopped down into a chair. Taking a goblet, he eagerly drank down water and wine, whatever was in front of him. John couldn't believe that Sansa was still dancing. He ran a hand through his hair, trying to dry the sweat clinging to his neck. "Lord John!" John sucked in a deep breath and fought down his urge to frown. The night was half over, he could make it through another few partners. He looked up from his drink at the woman standing by the table. "Yes, my lady," John answered. John saw her smile and darted a look behind her to a group gathered around a wine pitcher. He had a feeling this was some kind of wager. "I hoped to beg a dance from you, Lord John," she said. One thing all his partners had in common was that title. They emphasized it. He'd known that any of the guests who found him distasteful or unworthy avoided him altogether. That didn't stop a few elbows on the dance floor being thrown his way. He swore someone had muttered "bastard" as they passed in the circle. John prepared for another round when someone stepped to his side. "Snow, get off your ass," Val demanded. She grabbed John's hand and pulled him out of the chair before he could move. "Excuse me," the lady protested. Val ignored her and led John to a side table near the hall doors. Bourne and Marie were relaxed, each having indulged in the feasting. Bourne in particular looked flushed and giddy. "And what's made you so happy?" John asked. Marie giggled. "Bourne got himself a proper dance with Oranna, Mors Umber's daughter." "Better be careful," John chuckled. Smalljon nearly ripped Prince Joffrey in half for glancing too often at Sansa. "I can't imagine what Crowfoot would do to you." "Crowfoot is that old man with the eye patch?" Val asked. "He wouldn't stop staring at me after we arrived. He even asked me who my mother was. A strange man." John turned to Marie and Val. "Are you two attending the ladies' court tomorrow afternoon?" "Your sister wants me there to keep things from getting out of hand," Val said. Marie nodded. Sansa asked me to officiate it and give a blessing. What are you two planning? Bourne's happy glow dimmed. I was thinking of going down to Chain House. I know Yorick is skulking around somewhere. Let's avoid him, if possible. The bald shepherd had left a bit of a mark on poor Bourne. Jon wondered if his cousin would still take the insults lying down. Jon wasn't sure he would remain neutral if the gruff man came looking for a fight. Jon reached over to refill Bourne's cup. We could take Ghost and Crag down the hill. Smalljan will be busy with the other guests, so we can slip away for a few hours. Val clapped her hands together. Enough with the planning. She stood and grabbed Jon's hand again. I've left you alone to entertain these girls, now we'll have a proper dance, Val told him. Genuinely excited for the first time that evening, Jon happily followed his, whatever Val was, onto the dance floor just in time for Smalljan to call for a rowdy tune. They spent the rest of the evening in each other's arms. If Val was conspicuously absent from her shared chamber with Sansa and Daisy until the early hours of the next morning, neither woman was keen to mention it at breakfast. ///////////// The next morning, Sansa took the ladies of the castle with her to Last Hearthscodswood to hold her impromptu court. It sat nestled along the ridge of glamour, with only a low rock wall to mark the boundaries. Marie pointed out that instead of any trail, huge slabs were laid into the earth almost like paving stones. Omer mentioned there were old legends about an ancient castle swept off the hill by a great winter storm in ages past. The first Umber kings found the ruins and decided not to risk their own home being thrown clear into the roaring forest. They refused to build anything with rock except the foundations of Last Hearth. Omer's matron used to joke, "You never know when you'll need to set your own roof aflame." A strange saying that wriggled in Sansa's mind as she waited for the women to settle. She'd adapted the idea for the event from good Queen Alysanne's women's courts and the informal meetings that the Lords of Winterfell held during the harvest feasts. The ladies' court would be an opportunity for the visitors to speak officially to her as the eldest daughter of House Stark, about issues that their male relatives might find hard to bring to her father's attention. It was a stressful afternoon, with Sansa relying heavily on Daisy, Val and Marie to keep the discussion civil and on track. More than a few attendees brought up conflicts between their smaller houses. The masterly houses of the Umbers were discontent with the masterly houses of the Karstarks over the flow of trade along the last river. The mountain clans wanted the rights to hunt further south, claiming their normal herds were straying away from the Bay of Ice. The Lonely Hill representatives wanted reparations from some Bolton vassals for allegedly poaching deer before mating season. It was all quite chaotic, and privately Sansa thought it exhilarating. These were tangible problems that she could help solve. The fun came to an end when Aelys nearly knocked out Tess Dolok's teeth over some rumor that Harry on Karstark had gotten a child on Tess' aunt. It was past time to eat, so Sansa called for a closure of the court. Marie gave a blessing and Sansa thanked Lady Tulla for her gracious hosting. Their party split to find refreshments as Bourne and Jon returned to the halls. Val walked straight up to Jon and caught his attention with a few rubs on the chin. Really, her brother was a bit too much like Ghost. "Did you have a nice time?" Sansa asked the boys. Bourne nodded, looking less miserable than that morning. Waking up hungover and receiving a subtle threat from Moore's Umber would put a damper on anyone's day. "A bit of fresh air always does me good," Bourne said. He added, "We also found something interesting near the base of the hill." Bourne pulled open his satchel and grabbed a handful of small dark stones, holding them out for Val and Sansa to inspect. They were chips of rock with the most interesting coloring. Shimmering ebony, slick and shiny inside a glass-like coating. Sansa recalled Maester Lewin had some pieces like it in his study. "It's dragon glass," Sansa pointed out. Jon stepped forward with his own handful. There's lots of it embedded in Glamour's rock. Though there were sections that looked almost hollowed out, like it had been mined. Val had picked up a few pieces. "There's a lot of the stuff past the wall. If you can't get your hands on good enough stone or bronze, a few desperate folk know how to fashion knives and arrows out of it. We never called it dragon glass, the wise women call it Feldska, fire rock. Graves near the Frostfangs are filled with it. The children carry weapons from it. They used to deliver 100 daggers to the Watch every year, for new recruits," Marie told them. "Have they spoken to the Great Shepherd about it?" Jon asked. "They never said anything to me." Mance and father are still exchanging messages last I heard. I can send a letter to ask, Bourne replied. John realized too late that Sangza was standing with them. He froze, like he'd been caught stealing sweets from the kitchen. Sangza's eyes were wide. Children. John, have you spoken with a child of the forest? She furiously whispered. Sangza was rushed into a side chamber, away from any prying ears. Naturally, she was quite disturbed not just by the revelation that her brother had spoken with the ancient people of West Eos, who, even with Bourne's reassurance that some still lived, seemed more a fairy tale or legend. John's explanation required revealing the truth about Val's heritage and the meetings with Mance Raider. His sister was dumbstruck. She sat in a chair and carefully absorbed everything. The urge to panic was difficult to fight. Father knows? Sangza asked. John nodded. Sangza took a relieved breath. The others are moving. Will they attack the wall? Bourne crossed his arms. The children seem to think so. How long do we have? Sangza wondered. We've no clue, Val told her. Mance hopes that by moving all the free folk south it'll slow them down. The last scouts I heard from said the whites were roaming openly on the west side of the mountains. We know the others have been spotted on the giant's stairs though. Some say they've come closer to the wall in secret. It could be years, Bourne added. The old tales say the White Walkers marched down into West Eos in separate forces, of different sizes. Supposedly, sometimes they retreated and launched small raids to rebuild their armies. Now, the wall will stop them from going unchecked. We have time, John reassured her. Once father returns, he's going to visit Castle Black and open talks with Mance. Sangza calmed and gave her brother a kind hug. She could see that the secrets had been a hard burden for him. No doubt he would inform Rob when they returned. There's nothing we can do now. Let's just ensure the rest of the event runs smoothly, Sangza told them. //////////////// That night, John laid down in his bed and dreamed. Cold winds blew drifts of snow the size of towers across a barren field. John stood on a tree branch hundreds of feet in the air. Amid the storming flurries he spotted a black form gliding through the sky. It was a crow. With every beat of its wings, John saw a fresh layer of snow and ice cling to its feathers. It was desperately flying despite the heavy frost. He tracked the crow's destination, a massive monolith that was unmistakably the wall far to his left. The crow called out shrill and clear, "North! North! North!" Another gust of wind swept down from the distant mountains. The tree John perched on trembled. The crow cried, "Snow! Snow! Snow!" John tried to hold on, but the earth itself churned and his grip faltered, sending him careening out of the tree towards the ground. He screamed as he fell. He screamed again as he jolted awake in bed. For a brief moment John held his breath, taking in the dream, the vision. He sat up and turned, ready to go wake Bourne in the adjoining room. His cousin beat him to it. Light illuminated the cracks of his chamber door and John rose when someone knocked. "Bourne," John whispered. The door creaked open and Bourne leaned in, his long hair tousled and eyes red from a small candle in his hand. "I need to talk with you," John Bourne said. "About what?" "I think I saw something in my sleep." "Winter, snow," the wall Bourne began, "and a crow," John finished. John thought Bourne looked hunted, disturbed. They both threw on more clothes and sat down at the small table near their fireplace. Judging by the coals, it had been a few hours since they'd gone to bed. "I've never seen anything that vivid before," Bourne commented. John was reminded that Bourne was accustomed to vague feelings and hazy recollections outside of the one green dream he experienced while escorting Green Eyes to Winterfell. John thought the vision felt similar to his wolf dreams, a much more comforting experience than consciously watching, which he still struggled with compared to Arya and Bran. "Where were you?" John asked him. "At the base of the wall. I was watching the crow fly when the wind picked up, then I heard a crack and a chunk of ice and stone fell from above me. I jumped out of the way but landed on a sheet of ice. It gave out beneath me and I woke up when I started drowning," Bourne described. "What do we do?" John asked. Bourne rubbed the sleep out of his eyes. "We should find Marie in the morning." A rush of kicks hit the door to the hallway. Bourne walked over and cautiously answered. Marie pushed past her brother, barging into the room. She must have run from her own bedroom, she was sweating and her gown was askew. "You're both okay?" Marie sighed in relief. "You saw the crow too?" Bourne asked her. "I saw the whole thing," Marie confirmed. "The storm came down from the mountains and swept across the forest. I was high above it all in an eagle, the crow was beneath me. I was distracted." She turned to John. "I think I saw you, perched on a massive weirwood tree branch." "Well, I assumed it was you. It was a direwolf with white fur and red eyes. Although you had big patches of black fur running along your back." "Did you see Bourne?" John wondered. Marie made an effort to straighten her clothes and tidy her long hair. "Perhaps. There was something standing at the base of the wall. It was tall but wreathed in mist." They all sat in silence, contemplating their shared experience. "We have to go north," Marie declared. "What?" Bourne said. Marie stoically made her case. "The message is clear. The crow needs us in the north." "You think this is a message from the three-eyed crow?" John asked. "The mysterious figure that needed to be brought south according to the children. Whatever or whoever they are, it's clear they're in need of aid," Marie explained. "We can't just go north, we don't know where to go," Bourne pointed out. "Even if we did know, we can't just pack up and leave," John added. "The Umbers will think us mad if we just announce a trip beyond the wall. By the gods, how are we even supposed to get past the wall?" John. Marie leaned forward, the flickering candle sending waves of crimson across her face. She appeared like a shadow flickering in the sunlight. "You saw the same things I did. The ice and the snow is coming, winter is coming. I know in my heart that if we do nothing, the crow will be swallowed by the cold. If the children spoke truly, we must save it. Val can be our guide. It won't be easy, but there must be some way to slip by the Night's Watch unnoticed. Once we're through, we can find Raider. Hopefully, our dreams can point us in the right direction." Marie felt her connection to the gods deeply, and she had never found cause to doubt it. Bourne's skepticism shone through clearly. John would be the deciding vote. He worried that Marie would leave on this journey with, or without him. "What can we do, Marie? Against something out of myth?" John asked her. Marie held out her hands, one to John, one to Bourne. "Everything we can. // You're sure you want to go now?" Small John asked. John clapped his future good brother on the shoulder, looking more confident than he felt. "It's just convenient. I'm this far north already, and it's been a few years since my uncle visited." "But why aren't you going straight to the wall?" John pointed to the two men speaking with Bourne by the stables. "Lord Umber was kind enough to ask those men to draw me a better map of the gift. I'll spend some time visiting the old holdfasts, hopefully one will be suitable for a keep," John explained. Small John scratched his beard. "Sansa and I would feel better if you had some guards going with you." "They'll only slow us down," John insisted. "Besides, weren't you the one who said the raids have dwindled to practically nothing? The gift is the safest it's been in years." "Doesn't mean there's no fucking wildlings skulking about," Small John pouted. Sansa walked over and took her betrothed's hand. "Bourne and Marie have gone wandering plenty of times on their own. John's in capable hands," she told him. Small John acquiesced. All right. I just wish he was going with you back to Winterfell," he said. Sansa blushed when Small John laid a kiss on her hand. "Sir Roderick won't let a hair on my head be harmed." John left the two to their own goodbyes while he rejoined Val by their horses. Packs of supplies and camping gear were stowed in their saddlebags, and they even had an extra horse to carry other equipment. According to the chain house pair, there were a handful of still standing structures in the gift. Most were in shoddy condition, but with some work they could be rebuilt. After a quick survey, he would make his way to Castle Black to visit Uncle Benjen, then return to Winterfell. That was the plan he'd shared with the Great Yon anyways. It was only partially false. Marie was confident that the closer they got to the wall, the clearer their dreams would become. John really was going to get the lay of his new land, and hopefully pick out a suitable hold to take for his own one day. Until they received some clairvoyance or direction, they'd be wasting their time near the wall, so why not make it a trip? Without other options, Bourne had agreed to accompany them, and Val had been enthusiastic about getting out of the castle. She had been worried by the shared visions John had seen, especially since she knew nothing of a three-eyed crow. John took one last moment to admire the architecture of Last Hearth, bid Sansa a fond goodbye, then led his party down the Glamour, through the roaring forest, along the last river and up the King's Road. Their first stop was a lone tower, called Queen's Crown. // Notes. /n, one more chapter in the north, then we'll check back in with Ned. John and co. are heading to the wall. I know some early comments wondered if I was just giving Bran's story to John. I hope it's clear that is not the case. I'm still in the middle of ironing out how I want the others to factor into this story. I can promise this will not end up being a War for the Dawn fic. How to do that and still have a satisfying story is another matter. If you have any fics that balance the normal plot with the White Walkers, please send me the name. I'm pretty happy with John Ghost Stuck, for multiple levels of meaning. I wanted something unique to John, but the color system felt generic. I also feel that White Wolf, a very common fanfic name for John, was a bit too bland outside a cool nickname. Let me know how it sounds, and if you have an alternative, let me know. Chapter 35, Warm Their Hearts, Part 3. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Leaving Smallgen behind was harder than Sansa expected. They'd been side by side for most of the last 7 weeks, ever since her name-a-day. The first kindlings of affection had steadily built into a cautious romance. It may not have been dressed in courtly finery or poetic overture, but Alis and Edara were convinced that Smallgen was truly besotted. They'd exchanged small gifts and gestures. Sansa's collection of songs and poems had been shared with most of the Umber family, and even if Smallgen was no artisan, he took her riding and brought fine hides and furs from the hunt. Arya had joked in her letters that despite Sansa's disappointment at a northern match all those years ago, fate had thrown her into a marriage out of song. Sansa replied that her relationship with Smallgen wasn't all a fairy tale. Her betrothed's head was harder than a bull's. If he thought someone had insulted him, nothing could dissuade him from demanding due justice. When he was a stripling, more than one visitor to Last Hearth had beaten Smallgen bloody in the yard over such demands. Once he hit his growth spurt, the beatings started going the other way. Similarly, if they disagreed on some matter, Smallgen demanded to be proven wrong before he considered compromising. Even Great Jon had difficulty bending his son's ear. Nevertheless, Sansa did her best to hide a few straight hairs when Smallgen tied 2 emeralds around her neck on her last day in Last Hearth. He was no man of great words, but all Umbers felt very strongly that partings should be taken seriously. More than one kinsman had left the castle only to die in a wilderling raid. Alis had left for Carhold with Daisy already, leaving her alone except for her guards and attendants. Smallgen kissed her cheeks, she kissed his brow, Shepherd Yorick gave a blessing, and Sansa was on her way. The celebration had been exhausting, but most of the guests had taken the time to compliment the festivities. Marie assured her more than one house had found new friendships and tentative allies that distance and weather typically stymied. Daisy was confident that before the year was out a handful of marriages would be announced, all thanks to Sansa's idea. Hopefully, more events like it could bring the next generation of lords and ladies to support Robb like the older nobles did her father. Speaking of her brother, she returned to Winterfell during a rainstorm, and Robb welcomed her home with warm tea and an entire platter of lemon cakes. He'd done well managing Winterfell on his own, though she could tell he'd been lonely. That evening, she sat with Robb in Father's Solar and explained the truth Jon had learned on Skagos, as well as his new destination. Robb nearly leapt to his feet, the wish to follow their brother on the tip of his tongue. Common sense prevailed, and instead Robb resolved to look back through the Stark histories for more information on this mercurial threat. Maester Lewin was confident that their winter calculations were reaching a final stage. Hopefully, they would have a tentative prediction once Father returned. With all the excitement over, they settled back into their routine. Peace only lasted until a letter arrived by Raven from White Harbour with shocking news from Lord Marndale: King Robert was dead. No sooner than Robb had begun drafting an urgent message to their father, another letter followed, from the man in question. It described the sad extent of King Robert's injury on a hunt and a private fear that his grace was not long for this world. The birds were delayed, and often messages sent days or weeks apart from each other arrived simultaneously. Raven's wings flapped in a desperate cycle, arriving and departing every day. With letters and missives flying back and forth so frequently, Maester Lewin requisitioned 2 of the household servants solely to keep the birds well fed and rested. No sooner than they'd grappled with the sudden death of the king than Stannis Baratheon's declaration arrived. Lord Baratheon claimed the Iron Throne for himself as Robert's heir, declaring Prince Joffrey, Prince Tommen and Princess Myrcella, bastards of incest. Not to be outdone, Joffrey Baratheon penned his own announcement, labeling not just his uncles Stannis and Renly as criminals, but their father as well. King Joffrey accused Stannis, Renly, Eddard and the late Jon Arryn, what a shock it was to find out that the Lord of the Vale had also perished, of scheming to usurp his birthright. In a royal order, Robb was told to present himself in King's Landing to swear allegiance in place of their traitorous patriarch. Robb and Sansa had no clue as to their father's whereabouts and none of their letters to Riverrun were returned. The latter mystery was answered by an urgent word from Seaguard. Lord Jason Mallister alerted them that the Lannisters had marched out of Golden Tooth and laid siege to Riverrun. Such an insult demanded an answer. Sansa was to remain behind and rule as the Stark in Winterfell while Robb called the banners to assemble at Moat Cailin. Robb knew that time was of the essence and every account he found in the Stark histories about mustering included some complaint about how marshalling the lords to Winterfell involved entirely too much annoyances. When King Torrhen set out for the Trident to treat with the Conqueror, he ordered his vassals to meet him in the Neck. The most southern houses could take more time to properly equip themselves, and the most far-flung vassals would be too harried to make trouble upon their arrival. The stressed Starks were given a modicum of relief when just as the armies of the north began to move, a message came under the Tyrell seal, in Ned's own hand. My dearest children, I pray to the gods that you are in good health. War is in the air and I fear the winds will bring nothing but woe with every new sunrise. I'm unsure when my words will reach you but I shall do my best to explain all that has happened. Ned wrote about his flight from King's Landing with Renly and the devastating circumstances of Jon Arryn and Robin Arryn's death. Their father was the honored guest of the newly crowned king in the Reach, and would accompany him on the march to King's Landing. They also learned that Lord Yohn Royce had been elected Lord Paramount in absentia. Supposedly the hosts of the Vale were heading to King's Landing to find an answer for their liege lord's death, though no one was sure if King Joffrey or the Queen Mother were in a position to appease them. Rumors had already reached White Harbour that the Lannisters had sent the Mountain to kill both the infirm Jon Arryn and strangle the young falcon in his sickbed. I have only just learned of the Lannister invasion of the Riverlands. Though the term invasion may be ill-suited. According to the Tyrells, Jaime Lannister departed King's Landing shortly after my escape and rode hard with a host of red cloaks. He broke off from the Gold Road then defeated 2 small hosts of Rivermen near Pink Maiden and Acorn Hall. The Kingslayer joined with Lord Tywin's army and together they laid siege to your grandfather's hall. The rest of the Riverlands have been left mostly untouched, though a party of House Piper was taken prisoner when they approached the Lannister camp. I'm convinced that the Old Lion means to capture your mother, Arya, Bran, Rickon and the Tullys. He could force the North and the Riverlands to sue for peace, leaving them free to confront Renly and Stannis. It is my shame to admit I can do nothing. Our force is under strict guard and King Renly is adamant that we lords stay close at hand. I must place faith in you, my children. Robb, you must call the banners. The lords of the Riverland are hesitant to enter into this conflict, especially against the Lannisters and King Joffrey, even if the Tullys are in danger. In this instance, your mother's blood will be nothing but a boon. Drag the loyalists along with you and make for Riverrun. You must break the siege and rescue your mother. I know you will make me proud. Know that this retaliation will likely lead to open war with the Westerlands. I do not order this lightly. Sansa, Winterfell will be in your hands. Not only the castle, but the morale of the people left behind. Uncertainty in the field ripples back to home surprisingly quickly. Even under the best of circumstances, men of the North will die, and it will be up to you to keep the peace. Jon, I know you will support your brother and sister in this, but now is the time to begin accepting the responsibility of your future title. Robb will need all his focus for the foreseeable future. You will be his eyes and ears when he is otherwise occupied. Much the same as I was for Robert during the rebellion. I shall pray every day for you all, as I know you will pray for me. Be safe. Your father, Lord Eddard Stark. Sansa's heart cried out to know that Jon was too far away to reach. They could not afford to waste men and horses gallivanting off into the gift. Unfortunately, he was on his own. // The walls of Moat Cailin once again witnessed a Northman's warpath. The official letter from Lord Stark assuaged many of the Northern Lords' anxieties. The branding of their warden as a traitor was a disturbing echo of a similar royal decree made many years ago. King Robert's death, Stannis' accusations, the Vale's uncertain emergence into the war, things were moving at a pace. Robb and Sansa would not have their kingdom left behind. It was fortunate that with their father's excursion to King's Landing and the aftermath of the battle on the Stones, very few houses were eager to sit out yet another chance at glory. Robb's final count was 26,000 soldiers at the ready, composed of heavy cavalry and a strong corps of foot and pike. He'd been reassured by his advisers that Riverrun could hold out under siege for weeks, giving him time to muster a strong force. Grey Wind prowled in front of Robb as he made his way through their camp. The main hall of the gatehouse tower was filled to brim. Robb stood in the doorway. At his flanks were his future good brothers, Harryon and Smalljon. Robb noted the Great Jon arguing with Lord Hornwood, saw Mage Mormont laughing beside Lord Glover while Lord Ryswell spoke intently with the Knot and the Liddle. Lord Karstark was mired in his own personal circle, which contained most of the Bolton vassals who had marched uneasily with their lord absent. The Mandaelis were in full force, their livery standing in stark contrast to the muted tones of Lord Reed and his lieutenants. The last group was more conspicuous. A gaggle of men and women huddled by the hearth, decked in green robes with white masks. The shepherds had been sent from Skagos, and he knew many of the lords had brought their own. Robb wondered how much say they would want in the council meeting. According to his father, no shepherds had made themselves known in his own war sessions. Lords of the North, Harryon called out. The men and women continued to rouse and rabble. Robb was about to call a howl out of Grey Wind when Smalljon bellowed, "Quiet down." It took a moment for Robb's hearing to return. "Be seated," Robb commanded. The large table had been cobbled together, and it was just large enough to squeeze everyone around it, with plenty more standing in the wings. "You have answered the call of House Stark, for that I thank you. I shall be clear and straightforward. I plan to march through the moat in 3 days. Lord Reed's guides will speed us through the neck to the Twins. Once we've crossed, Lord Mallister and a number of river lords are waiting to join us near Seaguard." Robb laid out his plan. He picked up a long stick near his chair at the head of the table and used it to point on the large map laid across its surface. "We'll then follow the coast south to Pendrick Hills, past Raventree Hall, and make straight for Riverrun. Will the Lannisters not try and stop us?" Lord Mandaely asked. Lord Karstark stood. "We can expect some force to be sent to slow us down, but by all accounts the Lannisters have not fully committed to a campaign in the Riverlands. The Old Lion still has to worry about Renly Baratheon marching on King's Landing." Lord Flint of Widow's Watch spoke next. "I want to know why we're not gathering our full strength to crush the lions." That earned some rumbling from the room. Robb raised his hand. "On the advice of Lord Stark, I have ensured enough fighting men are left behind to properly defend the north. With Lord Royce leading the Vale, I have decided that we need not overcommit. What shall we do once we break the siege?" A lord yelled out. "Take the rock. March on King's Landing." Everyone in attendance suddenly needed to contribute. "Are we declaring for King Renly?" someone shouted. Robb wanted to cut that argument short. "Until my family is safe from the Lannisters, that will remain undecided. For all we know, the kingship may be decided within the next few weeks. I personally hope that Lord Stannis and Lord Renly can come to an amicable resolution. There, that should be political enough to keep the gossip at a minimum." Robb could nearly feel the wrinkles forming as the men went around and around in circles over the same subjects. He brought the council to a close after hearing the arguments for the marching order. Overall, his men were enthusiastic about the coming battle. Robb hoped their good cheer endured the long journey ahead. Harryon Robb motioned the Karstark over to him. "Go speak with the shepherds, ask them if they have anything to share. I don't want any surprises before we depart." None of the green-cloaked attendants spoke up during the meeting, not even to voice their own opinions. They had watched and listened, nothing more. Robb busied himself seeing a handful of lords stop for a quick word with him before leaving. Harryon returned wearing a puzzled frown. A shepherd by the name of Lady Tiller said they have no official opinion on the council matters Harry On told him. Unofficially, she wished to inform you that the ears and eyes of the great shepherd will travel with you. A loaded statement. Rob cursed under his breath. Old God save him from cryptic mystics. John had complained enough about the shepherd's habit of keeping information close to the breast. Rob could only assume that shepherds would be spread throughout his ranks, likely serving as footmen or even cavalry if they were wealthy enough. For all he knew, they were attendants and stable hands. It could be a good thing, Rob conceded, to have extra insight into his own force, if the shepherds would deign to share their knowledge with him. Lady Tiller did emphasize it was the great shepherd whose influence was being spent. Those worries were set aside, the campaign required his full attention and Rob couldn't afford to be distracted. The moat had been well fortified by Lord Reed using the extra materials from the canal projects, and he had agreed to partner with a selection of minor houses to garrison the fortress against the south. If matters turned against them, the army would need a safe place to retreat. As he promised, 3 days later Rob raised ice at the end one last valorous speech to the roaring of the Northern Army. He became the third Stark since the Dance of Dragons, to march to war in the Riverlands. Somewhat amusingly, before the conquest it was a common sight for the Direwolf to come south in arms, especially during the cold lead up to winter. When supplies ran low, Rob's ancestors were not above raiding their Andal neighbors. Many princes of Winterfell had gone south with their fathers, to come back blooded and alone. Rob could only hope he would not return as the new Lord of Winterfell. // The crossing was closed to them, as Rob suspected. The twins blocked the road to his family's salvation. House Free had not been totally idle during the chaos sweeping the countryside. Across the river a sizable camp hosted part of their army. News on the road was sparse, but Rob was able to find out that Renly had finally left Highgarden, though his pace was slow. Stannis had purportedly sailed from Dragonstone, though no one could confirm his destination. The Lannisters were rumored to be massing the rest of their armies in the Westerlands, which was the reason so many Riverlords had pulled back their forces, in anticipation of a full-scale invasion. That left River unisolated, and the northern host, its best chance at rescue. Rob was greeted outside the gates of the eastern castle by Sir Stephen Frey. The heir to the twins was reasonable enough, despite his weasel-like appearance, though it was obvious to Rob the man was tired. Still, being heir to your family's holdings at the age of 60 would strain anyone. Regardless of Stephen's hospitality, it still took 2 days of bickering through messengers to arrange a meeting with the late Lord Frey. The decrepit old lord's hall was cloyingly packed, with more tables than a tavern. 3 cousins and children bookended each and every place to sit. The Lord of the Crossing himself was scrawny, bird-like, with enough sagging skin to stitch a bag out of. Walder Frey's sharp tongue lashed fast and often, as if the old man's lungs were 100 years younger. He demanded much of Rob. At first, Rob offered wealth in the form of an exclusive trade deal for northern goods, but Lord Frey was unsatisfied. Rob's next offers were similarly based around payments, though the regular toll the Freys demanded for the army was unpayable. Lord Walder attempted to bargain for Rob to marry one of his dozen granddaughters instead. Lord Karstark nearly burst a blood vessel before Rob made it clear he was spoken for. They remained locked in a stalemate for another day and a half. Nothing would satisfy Lord Frey, and Rob refused to step on his grandfather's toes by making promises that only a Tully could keep. Finally, in frustration and desperation, Rob offered a betrothal between his brother, Bran, and a free girl of similar age. He emphasized that as the heir, the betrothal could be drafted, but not finalized until Lord Stark agreed. Lord Frey seemed disappointed at the measly concession. Mind you, it didn't prevent him from also wrangling a new trade deal out of the proceedings. Rob began to suspect that Lord Frey's brood were getting nervous about the thousands of Northmen sitting outside their walls. Rob led his men across the bridge nearly a week after arriving. He was already mentally apologizing to his younger brother for using him like a bargain chip. As he got his first sight of Seaguard, relievingly surrounded by a sizable force under the Mallister banner, an urgent message arrived from Daery. The King of Highgarden was apparently headed to Storm's End, and the Lords of the Vale were past the Bloody Gate and on the King's Road. Just as importantly, Lord Royce had publicly announced his support for King Stannis Baratheon. As matters now stood, King Renly commanded the allegiance of Highgarden and nominally the Stormlands, King Joffrey had only the Crown lands and Westerlands, while Stannis had the Narrow Sea, Vale and potentially the North and the Riverlands. The road to King's Landing was open and Joffrey Baratheon was soon to be surrounded. The bards were already calling it the War of the Three Kings, some called it the War of the Stags. No matter the name, the fate of the Iron Throne was soon to be decided. // Notes. /n, we are now back in the south. Robb had made his march, but with the Vale not in isolation things have shifted dramatically. Unlike in canon, the King's Road is not easily locked down early in the war, as the Crown lands have been forced to turtle because of threats from both the south, west and now north. Without the desperate need to get through the crossing, Robb can take more time negotiating. While Walder Free is a greedy bastard, he is very careful about who he pisses off. Robb is not the Lord of Winterfell, just the heir, and his word is not final. Additionally, without Tyrion's capture setting off a war, Tywin does not have time to launch a full campaign into the Riverlands and is trying to get it done quick and dirty. Will it work out? Maybe. Ned is with Renly heading to Storm's End, so we've got a bit of brotherly love in store for us next time. Comments are always appreciated. Let me know what you think of the chapter. Chapter 36, Brother's Blood. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. The leaves were changing. It was a subtle shift, hard to notice among the plentiful greenery of the Reach. The fading color was more obvious to Ned after they crossed into the Stormlands. Days passed slowly, and with little to do, the Lord of Winterfell focused on his surroundings to keep his thoughts from spiraling with worry. His nerves were running high, rest was hard to get. Mor felt his restlessness and became irritable. The Rainbow Guard would not permit him in Renly's presence, and since Mor was always at his side otherwise, Ned was forced to send him far from their trail, into the depths of the Kingswood. Their men had been divided up among Renly's sprawling camp. Most of the soldiers were being treated well enough, but the lords and commanders had been sequestered with Ned among Renly's personal entourage, watched by loyal knights. Renly's crowning and the subsequent endless celebrations had disappeared when Stannis' siege of Storm's End began. Ned was surprised that Renly could take something seriously, after the gaudy and lavish wedding festivities. The lords of Highgarden were perfectly willing to starve out the Crown lands and revel in their own stores. Westeros had underestimated how eager House Tyrell was to put a crown on their Lady Margaery. Tables laden with feasts were quickly left behind when the army swerved off the Rose Road to cut southeast towards the Kingswood. The march took them through fell fields, along the edge of the Red Mountains. They met no resistance. Practically all the Stormlords had pledged for Renly already, or were savvy enough to keep quiet. Their camp was now half a day from Storm's End. By the next afternoon they'd be in sight of the ancient seat. The northern nobles were now arranged around the hearth in Ned's private tent. They'd eaten their regular supper and retreated to private discussion. "Is there no chance for peace?" Domeric asked. "The Tyrells won't stand for Renly bending the knee, not when Stannis has a florent wife," Lord Kevan Condon told him, while taking a deep draught of his ale. "Not when they have a chance for their own blood to wear the crown." Domeric frowned. "Wouldn't it be wiser to remove the Lannisters before fighting over who replaces them?" Roose looked up from the map in his lap. "Perhaps under different circumstances," he told his son, "but the Reachmen know their odds of claiming the crown are worse if the rest of the kingdoms are allowed a say. Even if Stannis wasn't already wed, they made no friends by siding with the Targaryens during the rebellion. When a crown is to be won, you must take the opportunities that come to you." "Lord Bolton is right," Ricard Risswell chimed in. He was stitching together a rip in his saddle gloves near the tent flap. "The Tyrells backed Renly because if it comes down to them against the Lannisters, they have the numbers to win before the other kingdoms can interfere." "Stannis will lose the battle," Domeric said. Donal Locke leaned forward to toss another log on the fire. "The Stone Stag'll put up a fight. If he'd taken Storm's End, he might even have outlasted them. Without the castle, his siege will end much quicker than Mace Tyrell's." "What do you think, Lord Eddard?" Lord Kevan Condon asked. The gathered nobles subtly turned to study their liege. Ned was standing over a table, his hands busy with a quill in a small book. "After we left Highgarden, I tried to speak with King Renly in private, about peace talks with his brother," Ned revealed. "For a moment, I thought he might agree with me, but that door has closed." barring me from the war councils made that clear. Will he ask us to fight for him, Lord? Garrus Sawin asked. He and Sakyle Condon had taken a break from their dice game to focus on the conversation. Ned stroked his chin, perhaps. Though our numbers wouldn't make a difference. I wonder whose idea it was, Domeric pondered. Did the Tyrells approach Renly, or did he seek them out? Jon O's furrow ran a whetstone across his sword, the dustin axes gleamed on the polished pommel. Renlis brought 15,000 riders. If that's not enough, he need only wait for his footmen. They'll stamp Stannis to dust, he declared. The old campaigner was certain. One way or another, we'll bend our knees and be on our way, Roose told them. Ned could only dip his head further to his writing, dreading the death looming before him. His dreams that night were dark, filled with smoke and fires, burning low beneath a great cairn of stone shaped like the maw of a dragon. // Lord Stark, His Grace requests you attend him. Ned was guided by one of the Rainbow Guard to the edge of the army, Roose and Kevan on his heels. The longer Ned spent in Renly's company, the more his resemblance to Robert strengthened. He was a mirror image of a younger Robert, more refined perhaps in some ways. It was the moods and whims that proved the Baratheon blood. Renly was gregarious and charismatic, men and women flocked to him no matter the setting, and whereas Robert's wits and sharpness had become mired in age and bitterness, Renly was fresh of mind. Hints and notes of cruelty shone through too. Robert's humor always did turn just a little far towards maliciousness. Renly was not above the same pettiness. Ned knew for certain that if Renly had finished his march to King's Landing, the war would likely have tilted in his favor. With the Crown lands, the Reach and the Stormlands under his banner, it would have been easy to negotiate with the Vale. To earn the North and Riverlands' support, he would only have to send his massive army towards the Westerlands and force Tywin Lannister back under the rock. That deft strategy also showed the capriciousness inherent to Renly's cleverness. Not many would have the gall to usurp their brother's claim, let alone with a historical enemy. Then again, it seemed that Renly had learned something from that torturous siege of his childhood. You must pay a price for victory. Ned only feared that both brothers were prepared to sacrifice the other for that chance. Lord Stark, King Renly beamed. The king was arrayed in his gilded armor, golden rose crown firmly affixed on his black hair. Your Grace, Ned acknowledged. One didn't spit in their host's face while still on polite terms. I have thought on your words and decided to extend to my brother a chance to speak under truce. He has agreed, much to my surprise. You shall accompany me, Renly informed him. A tendril of hope curled in Ned's heart as he was given a mount of his own. Their small party weaved through the foliage overlooking Storm's End. Nestled beside the walls of God's Grief, Stannis' camp appeared tiny. They came to a cleared section near the cliffside. Ned saw the man in question already waiting. Taking his chance, Ned urged his horse forward, leaving Renly behind. On the banners before him, the crowned stag now wreathed in flame, Stannis' attire bedecked in yellow and red to match. Standing out from the grim-faced escort was a fair woman wrapped in crimson. Lord Stark, I'm disappointed to see you here, Stannis threw forth. I was under the impression you knew where your loyalties should lie. I was under the impression that a man of his word keeps it, Ned rebuked. When you abandoned my men and I in King's Landing, I deemed it necessary to escape with my life. Sadly, I've been unable to stop this folly from continuing. Folly? Stannis said, you think a man claiming his rightful place is folly? I think two brothers striking at each other while our enemy sits content on the throne is folly, Ned refuted. Time was against me, Stannis explained. I learned that Robert was wounded and Cersei was calling the Crownlanders to her. It was imperative that the royal fleet be moved, and I couldn't guarantee my own safety if I returned. If you had returned, we could have occupied the city as we originally planned. Stannis' grimace tightened. Our plans required Robert to be on the throne. If that foolish brother of mine hadn't made his damn declaration, I'd have thrown down that bastard, Joffrey, by now. Their argument was cut short by Renly and Soloras. Stannis. How good to see you. I almost didn't recognize you with that strange banner. Clearly, neither man had come to submit. They aired their grievances with barbs and insults. Renly oozed arrogance, always having the clever quip, always needing the last word. Stannis' patience frayed further and further. to the point he drew steel. His shining sword shocked Ned and many others. It was strange, Ned likened it to looking at a torch being held inside one of his glass gardens. Ned tried to interject, to bring cooler heads to bear. It was like speaking to a wine-fueled Robert when they were young. He thought back to one night after a feast in the Eyrie, Robert had committed to climbing a tree in the dark. Instead of a dislocated shoulder and sore rump, these Baratheons would kill each other. Both drunk on a different kind of vice, a crown. Flags and tourneys will not make you a king, Stannis declared. Renly laughed, swords and lances from every corner of the realm, will. Do you see the host at my back, or have those fires blown smoke in your eyes? Once I've dealt with you, I will march to the Red Keep, with Rose, Falcon here. Renly glanced directly at Ned, Wolf and Trout. The lions will be put in their place. Surely you see it, Stannis. A man without humor, friends, or an heir, cannot unite a realm. Submit to me, and you shall live in peace. Stannis was fed up, his patience spent. He gave Renly an ultimatum: surrender by dawn or die. The king of the Narrow Sea and his red priestess rode away, ominous words their only parting gift. Renly was rattled, he flipped between rage and hurt. He jerked his steed over to Ned. You've heard his delusions first-hand now. Tell me, Lord Stark, will you join our charge against these rebels tomorrow? Ned looked at the towers rising defiantly against the sea. The home that Robert had spoken of with fondness. Were the last of the Baratheons doomed to die in folly? By boar on a simple hunt, by blade before their home. Was it the sick nature of fate that Robert's brothers, who had once survived by the strength of those walls, would kill each other in its shadow? These stags were dancing, clashing antlers to prove their dominance. Perhaps, Ned thought morbidly, the Targaryen blood was not so thin in these sons of Ois. Ned clenched his teeth. I cannot in good conscience raise arms against Robert's blood with no just cause. I'm only glad your brother and parents are not alive to see this. You have committed to this path, King Renly. Now you must follow it to the end. He left Renly there, alone upon the bluff. The roses lost their luster under the clouded skies. Once he's won, we should make our way to Harren Alkevan suggested. Why there? The battle will be at King's Landing. We might as well stay with Renly, Donal argued. Northerners milled about the camp in the early dawn. None of them could sleep when Renly's army shuddered like 1,000 steel branches in the storm, arming themselves for war. Renly had permitted Ned's soldiers to be quartered beside their commanders and to escort them during the battle. From their circle, Ned could see the Rainbow Guard and Renly's generals moving about the king's tent. He turned away, joining his men. Stannis may yet survive, flee back to Dragonstone, Domeric suggested. The royal fleet is still under his command. Should Stannis survive, I believe Renly has already proven his case, Roose stated. The Bolton Lord had seen the two men bicker the day before, and had not been impressed. Undoubtedly, Renly held the advantage. Roose was not blind to the generosity that could be won from the Tyrells by supporting him. Lord Stark said that a red witch was by his side. I'm not like to trust a man who keeps such counsel, Jon O's added. They say in Essos those that follow the red god burn folk alive and use slaves to guard their temples. He spit, sounds all too Valyrian to me. Before Ned could hold the argument from going in circles, a horrid cry spilled into the air. Roose whispered, that was from the king's tent. The din of blades spurned Ned into action. The Northman ran, matched by Garland Tyrell, emerging from his own tent across the way. Ned reached it first. He stepped over a dead knight in yellow armor, sprawled across the tent entrance. Inside, Ned saw the lifeblood leak out of Robar Royce's red chest plate. Loras Tyrell stood over Brian of Tarth, his blade desperately crashing against her guard. Ned noticed her left arm was clutched to her chest, a rent in her gauntlet. Loras was shouting incoherently, his fair face twisted in frothing rage. Ned froze when he spied Renly's stiff corpse upon the floor. Sir Kyle Condon rushed in behind him. Ned came back to his senses and drew his sword. He rushed forward to stop Loras from killing the woman. Ned's blade stabbed, not at Loras' back, but to deflect his next blow. It surprised the Knight of Flowers, who instinctively dodged backwards, putting Ned in front of him. Brian of Tarth dropped her sword with a sob. You did this. Loras roared, you and her. He came at Ned with a thirst to kill. Sir Kyle and Garrus Sawin threw themselves at the charging knight and barely held him back. Garrus lost 3 fingers on his sword hand in the brief exchange. Thankfully, it only took a few seconds for Garland to enter. He sprinted straight inside, took one look at his brother's blooded steel, the corpses at his feet, and tackled him to the ground. The 2 men yelled and tumbled. More Tyrell knights arrived and went to Garland's aid while encircling Ned and his men. Loras was restrained, but he threw more accusations. Northern savages, I'll have all your heads. Loras, Lord Stark had nothing to do with this, I saw him outside. Garland insisted. The youngest Tyrell brother struggled on, heedless of Garland's words. Eventually, they had no choice but to physically drag him away. Lord Stark, my apologies, Garland muttered as he ordered the guards to leave. Mace's second son could not draw his gaze from Renly. He swiftly followed his brother out of the tent. While Ned and Lord Condon saw to Garrus wound, Brienne of Tarth was clasped in chains. She put up no resistance. It took 2 men to get her upright. Her strength had left her, leaving only devastated murmurs about shadows with Stannis' face. Ned did have the wherewithal to notice it was men of House Florent who took her into custody. No one could quite believe what was happening. Confusion spread through the ranks like pox. Thankfully, Domeric had stayed behind and kept the northern retinue from being separated in the confusion. Ned watched Renly's body be wrapped in a sheet by Tyrell servants. He was ushered out and the once great army split apart. The Tyrells and a small number of other houses broke away and retreated west. Inevitably, a cadre of nobles went to make peace with Stannis. Ned and his men followed. King Stannis Baratheon, first of his name, did not appear as the conquering victor. To Ned's eyes, he looked shaken, masquerading his own shock as stony confidence. It was a simple matter for the remainder of Renly's host to bend the knee, and the Stormlanders among them too. Finally, it was Ned's turn. He said the words, kissed a ruby ring. Stannis helped him stand, clasped arms and bade him follow. Ned could only guess Davos Seaworth and others would see to the affairs of the army. I have need of you, Lord Stark, Stannis told him as they approached the gates of Storm's End. From the high crest above the ancient gates, people stood behind wooden barricades and stone battlements. Stannis took a horn from his squire, Penrose, he called through it. The answer has not changed, my lord, a man responded. Ned recalled that Sir Courtenay Penrose had been named Castellan of Storm's End while Renly was in the capital. They'd met only briefly during the rebellion, but the knight had earned a reputation for himself at Summerhall. Doubtlessly, you can see the dust trails heading off. I've come to tell you, that is the trail of those who did not bend the knee to me this morning. The king took a harsh breath. Renly is dead, Stannis proclaimed. You have 2 choices, Penrose. Open the gates, surrender the castle, and all inside shall see a fair trial. Hold it from me, and your lives are forfeit. Minutes of silence passed. Sir Courtenay shouted back, it'd be simple to believe you, but I think you lie, Lord Stannis. Those dust trails may yet be King Renly sending his reserves out to deal with you. Until you show me his body, I won't give you anything. Not my life, my loyalty, the keys to this castle, and certainly not my charge. Courtenay's speech was passionate, but tinged with desperation. Stannis lowered his speaking horn and turned to Ned. I offer him peace and he spits in my face. What charge is he speaking of? Ned asked. Robert's bastard, Edric Storm, Stannis answered. The boy's here. Ned was shocked. The small folk said that after Joffrey's crowning, the gold cloaks went rampant in the city, killing a number of supposed spies. This included a number of children and infants. When Ned learned they'd been the children of prostitutes and tavern maids, he suspected they were the same children Jon Arryn had been checking in on before their journey to Winterfell. Cersei had been killing off Robert's bastards. Outside of Mirestone, he wasn't sure any had survived. Yes, and I need him and the castle, Stannis emphasized as he thrust the horn into Ned's hand. Ned now understood. You want me to vouch for you? Stannis crossed his arms. The Red Priestess at his back, Melisandre she'd introduced herself as, simply smiled. Like she was watching some spectacle. Sir Courtenay Penrose. Ned yelled. Who speaks now? Lord Eddard Stark of Winterfell. Lord Stark. Penrose responded, he was clearly thrown by the name. We met once before, Sir Penrose, at my wedding in Riverrun. You'd been by Robert's side during the Battle of Summerhall. From what Robert said, you slew 4 men from Housefell while leading the right flank. More silence. Penrose was deliberating. Ned hoped the details and a touch of old memory would convince the knight of his identity. Why are you here, Lord Stark? Last we heard, you'd returned with King Robert to oversee matters in King's Landing. Ned sighed in relief. This would go much smoother from here on out. I did. I was at his side as he died, Courtnay. After I heard Robert's last words, the Lannisters poisoned Jon Arryn and I fled for my life. Does Stannis speak true? Penrose demanded. I saw Renly's body myself. Killed in his own tent, a dark end, Ned said, taking note of Stannis' flinch. When no response was forthcoming, Ned raised the horn again. See sense, sir. This is a battle you cannot win. Lord Royce marches with the Vale to Stannis' call as we speak. My own son has brought my banners south. The time has come to lay down your arms. Ned wished he could see clear to the top of the gate. No doubt Penrose was deeply considering the news. If Renly was dead, his sole hope for rescue was the Lannisters or perhaps the Martells. Neither option would be conducive to the survival of Edric Storm. Perhaps all the Castellan needed was a small push. Without consulting Stannis, Ned spoke loud and clear, I give you my word, I swear on the honor of Winterfell and my ancestors, that Edric Storm shall be safe in my care. He ignored the snap of Stannis' fiery eyes and the indignation in Melisandre's sneer. The beat of his heart brought more close at hand. He bled courage from his direwolf to his own breast. Ned chose to brave the ire of his new king, for the sake of a dead one. It worked. On your word, I will open the gates, Penrose announced. For a second time, Eddard Stark had lifted the siege of Storm's End. /////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////// Stannis' command was swiftly reorganized and plans were made for the attack on King's Landing. Ned was present at the castle's surrender. The garrison, for the most part, was pardoned. The exceptions were the commanders. On their orders the gates had been barred and banners raised for Renly. Sir Courtenay and 3 other men were given a simple choice, execution or the wall. Thankfully, Sir Courtenay and his fellows agreed to take the black. Ned gave them each a letter to Lord Commander Gia to put them in good favour upon their arrival. Though by all rights they had owed Stannis their allegiance from the beginning, it was no easy thing to go against the lord of your castle. Far less worthy men had become black brothers. Next, Robert's son was brought before them by the Maester. Edric Storm was sturdy and young, bristling with Robert's visage blended with florid features. In private, Ned wondered if Stannis saw his own future son in him. The boy was angry and scared. He wept when Penrose was sent away but clung to Ned after a few kind conversations when he revealed his relationship with Robert. By the time his fate was decided, Edric was grateful he would no longer be in the king's care. At first, Stannis had tried to send the boy away to Dragonstone indefinitely. Queen Sliss would not stand a bastard nephew to be raised in court, not when Princess Shireen was their only heir. Ned would not allow it. Another spout of arguments ended with compromise. Edric Storm would be held at Dragonstone until the throne was secured. Then he would be sent on to Winterfell, where he would remain in Ned's service at Stannis' discretion. Removed from any scheming nobles, Edric would be isolated from potential movements that could seek to use him as a figurehead. At the same time, it showcased Stannis' apparent trust in Ned, reinforcing the appearance that the Stark-Baratheon alliance would live on into Stannis' reign. Rhaegar's ghost may have been laughing, from whatever pit of hell he laid in. A bastard sent to the Starks to be protected and forgotten. Robert and Rhaegar's sons living under the same roof. /////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////// Large enough for more to wander comfortably, and Ned certainly appreciated the chance for solitude after weeks and weeks on the road. The Northmen had been afforded a wing of the keep to themselves, with their own guards and attendants. A weight had been lifted off the men, no longer prisoners but allies. Roos appeared unassuaged. he shared a cup of wine once night in Ned's temporary office. "Have you been to the Godswood?" Roose asked him. Ned nodded. "Aye, quite grand. Fitting for the Durandons, I think," Roose commented. The Godswood of Storm's End was perched on a cliff behind the oldest towers on the foundation, inside an ancient courtyard surrounded by incredibly tall stone walls. A chipped and broken wall allowed the Hartree's face to gaze out across the open ocean. Uniquely, it was filled with twice as many burnt trunks as healthy trees. The Maester said that during the fiercest storms, no one dared venture into the Godswood, for lightning would inevitably strike and set small fires. Ned asked if the Hartree was ever damaged. The Maester frowned and muttered something about no written accounts. Roose continued, "Have you spoken with the Red Priestess?" Ned took a drink of his wine, a crisp vintage from Blackhaven. A lesser quality than Renlis stores, but just having a different taste was enough to be refreshing. "No, she's quite private," Ned answered. Roose played with the loose hairs of his stubble. "She's been busy amongst the ranks of the army, gathering more and more converts. The soldiers have been inspired by His Grace's glowing blade." "What about the whispers of burnings?" "The most devout of the guard are tight-lipped. I had Domeric speaking with some of the squires. He learned that on Dragonstone, the king burned effigies of the Seven. A knight from House Hawke shut him out before he learned more." Ned paused as another clap of thunder rang overhead. "Be careful, the last thing we need is the priestess to focus on us," Ned instructed. "I wonder if following the king is worth accepting this red god." Ned considered his words. "Set a guard on the Godswood. Avoid making it obvious, but I want to know if the priestess begins having designs on it," Ned ordered. "I can only hope Stannis thinks that burning the Weirwoods would earn him more enemies than allies." // At the end of the week, Ned was summoned to the throne room to meet with his king. "The time to march is coming," Lord Stark Stannis told him. "My men are ready." "Good. You will not be following us onto the King's Road." "I have another task for you," Stannis explained. "I've received a letter from Lord Royce. The Valumen have taken Hayford, their armies are cutting off the capital's roads. They shall join our attack when I arrive." Stannis went to a small side table, covered with parchment. Melisandre stood near a bright brazier in the corner, intently watching the flames. "A delegation will go by ship to meet Lord Royce. You and your men will accompany them. I told you in Winterfell, the Vale Lords are no friends of mine. It is your duty to ensure the Vale is ready to accept my rule." Stannis handed over a thick packet of letters and maps. "No doubt all sealed and addressed to Lord Royce. If you give them justice for Jon and Robert Arryn, the Vale will come to you easily," Ned said. Stannis looked unconvinced. Melisandre stepped from her brazier, walking to Stannis' side. She made eye contact with Ned. He could see the zealotry hidden behind her pupils. "The Lord of Light sees all, and through his appointed champion, all of Westeros will be delivered. From the farthest beach of Dawn to the highest peak in the north. All shall know Arla's glory," she said. "The north is a cold place, my lady. Be careful that your lights do not wither in the wind. There are places in my homeland that have withstood more fearsome things than fire," Ned warned. "I'd also ask that you stay away from my men. They do not take kindly to the tenets of your faith. They fear the power of a true god." Melisandre quipped. Ned bared his teeth. They despise the concept of slavery and burnings. Stannis kept silent, though his hands clenched at the mention of slaves. Melisandre smiled. "All men must serve, in their own way. Enough of your squabbles." "You have your orders, Lord Stark," Stannis interjected. "One thing, your grace," Ned added. "What of Lady Brienne?" Loose lips in the grounds meant most people knew that Lady Brienne had been handed over by Queen Lyst's uncle to appease Stannis. By all accounts, most felt she had either killed Renly herself, helped the ones who did, or was too weak to have stopped the assassin. Ned had learned she was being held in a modest cell. Stannis chewed on his cheek. "No one has presented any evidence of her involvement in Renly's death. Therefore I have no reason to charge her. Yet she cannot be trusted to roam freely. Her father has been informed of her whereabouts. If Lord Tarth agrees to bend the knee, I shall release her into his custody." Ned decided it was the best that could be hoped for. With a solemn bow, he left the throne room, readying himself for the journey ahead. // The seas had never agreed with Ned's stomach. He'd been thankful that the Greyjoy rebellion had been fought on land, he wasn't keen to experience a melee on the water. Stannis captains knew their trade. As the army departed Storm's End, the fleet departed their ports. Half the fleet had been stationed at Dragonstone, half near Shipbreaker Bay. The two groups would converge on Blackwater Bay to prevent any escape by sea. A smaller squadron had broken off as they entered the bay and ferried Ned, the northern retinue, and Stannis' other ambassadors to a landing south of Rosby. The countryside was quiet. The Valyman had 3 small skirmishes on their march to King's Landing, capturing the undermanned castle of House Hayford, then fought and won a major battle against the Crown land armies near Rosby and Stokeworth. Rosby was being kept under siege by Lord Benedar Belmore, allowing Ned's party to continue unmolested to Hayford. Above the gates of Hayford, the bronze field of House Royce flew proudly beside the wheel of House Waynwood, the arrows of House Hunter, the tower of House Redfort, and the stars of House Templeton. Ned gave Garrus the signal, and the northern host lifted their banners. Horn calls alerted the sentries and a procession was sent out to clear the way through the tents and wooden spikes. There were calls of joy and greetings from the knights and lords who recognized Ned and his companions. They were met at the gates by Bronze Yone himself. The formidable Lord of Runestone towered over everyone else, clad in his runic plate. Ned dismounted his steed and stepped forward as Yone pulled him into a close embrace. "Eddard Stark!" Yone exclaimed. "You are a welcome sight." "Yone, I can't express how good it is to see you," Ned replied. "I'm sure there will be time to catch up, let's get your men quartered," Yone offered. "Lord Stark!" a voice called out. Ned turned and grinned as Morrick and Mathis Flint emerged from the crowd. There was a happy reunion for all, and eventually Stannis' envoys were welcomed inside. That night Ned dined alongside the lords and spoke about the death of Jon Arryn. He told them what he witnessed on that last day in the Red Keep. Lysa attacked Joffrey, raked her nails across his cheeks. "I'm not sure if she was imagining things or perhaps she saw something. Robin was smothered, that I know for sure," Ned recounted. "We knew she remained with the Lannisters," Lord Horton Redfort told Ned. "We received a letter from the Crown with one of her rings. They refused to explain Jon's death, so we refused to heed their orders. When Joffrey proclaimed Lord Arryn a traitor to House Baratheon, we couldn't stand by." Horton smiled as Domeric refilled his mug. The Bolton heir was delighted to reunite with his foster father and brothers. "Then they had Baelish ride to us," Yone revealed. "Baelish? Did they think you were unaware of the adultery?" Ned asked. "I say it was desperation. Littlefinger attempted to convince us of King Joffrey's benevolence, and the great rewards we would receive for defending his throne," Yone said. "Before the Tyrell blockade started starving the city, rumor slipped that Baelish wedded Lysa." Ned rubbed his brow. "The snake has the audacity to marry my good sister after defiling her beneath my roof. Does he imagine it will somehow give him legitimacy?" "Baelish is a rat trying to climb a ladder in a rainstorm," Roose commented. "He couldn't return to the Vale, so now he's bet on a Lannister victory to win power." "Are your forces ready to move on King's Landing?" Ned questioned. Yone nodded. "Preparations are being finished and we have scouts keeping watch for King Stannis. When he makes it out of the Kingswood, we'll come down on the northern walls." Lord Simon Templeton spoke from his place across the dinner table. "You should know, Lord Stark, your son Robb has marched deeply into the Riverlands. I imagine he'll be at Riverrun by now." Ned tensed and again considered abandoning the field to join with Robb and Jon. It would not endear him to Stannis, and the march back north would be long. "The war can be won if the capital is captured. I mean to ensure King Stannis has no reason to doubt my loyalty," Ned informed them. Yone nodded. "Sometimes the only option you have is to trust your blood shines true." Ned stood and lifted his cup. "To our victory, my lords, and to King Stannis." "Long live the king!" they chorused. Again, that night Ned dreamt of fire and stone. The great cairn had been cracked open and now shadows spilled into the sky, swallowing the moon. He awoke covered in sweat and reached out for more. The dreams were foreboding and he couldn't shake a sense of despair creeping up his spine. He would need to be careful, things were coming to a crossroads and his people couldn't afford to be on the wrong side of the coin toss. Notes. /n, we're almost there, the Blackwater is coming. We'll catch up one last time with Robb and then the southern groups will reunite. Will they win? Does the Manus now have a better shot at the crown? I'm pretty confident that the end of this arc will feature the real canon divergence that I've been building up in this fic. Chapter 37, Sun's Step. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Robb and Grey Wind crouched motionless in the shade of the oaks running along the valley. The air was frozen. Not even their blood pulsed. All was silent. The gods themselves watched with bated breath. A torch broke the mosaic. Its harsh color illuminated the green and brown of the landscape. A party of men pushed their mounts to the limit, riding hard down the hills to the south. Their purple shields were dulled black under the moonlight. The embers of their torches drifted behind them, swirling in their wake. They passed over a stream, through the valley and behind the rocky outcropping to the north. The darkness returned, the air stilled. More horses, more men. This time crimson fire revealed red cloth. The lions sped down into the empty ground, determined to catch their enemies, who had finally shown themselves. They were too eager, too reckless. After all, what did they have to fear with the famed Kingslayer leading them? The golden son of Tywin Lannister did not stop his pursuit when the trees let out a shrill cry. Grey Wind could tell the pitch was wrong, no birds nested in these trees tonight. Robb's heart thundered, his veins pumped hard while he quietly mounted his horse. He took a hand off his sword to wipe a hint of drool from his chin. The enemy passed a predetermined mark. The shrieks turned to horns and a northern roar enveloped the air. The Kingslayer and his men had but a moment to slow their march. The arrows of Robb's archers flew faster than their next thoughts. Robb and Grey Wind broke forward, the first to breach the tree line. No speeches, no poetic calls. His cavalry followed. Mormonts and Karstarks emerged from the north, bristling with spears and shields. The Great Jon and his vanguard kicked up dust as they descended from the right flank. The Westermen were caught unawares, flat-footed. Their courage and bravado snuffed out. Their rear lines tried to turn, to flee back, but the stream they crossed slogged down their retreat. Grey Wind reached the enemy first, outpacing Robb's guard, who formed up around him. Lord Rickard Karstark and Eddard Karstark let out a cheer when Grey Wind tore a swordsman's neck in half. Darin Hornwood called out a warning of the spearmen turning to face them, but their charge was swifter. The northern horses continued into and over the Lannister footmen. Robb spared a brief moment to wonder if Lord Tywin ever taught his eldest the danger of allowing northern heavy cavalry an easy target. Umber axes cut down a sad attempt to form a cohesive line and completed the pincer. Lord Mallister and the other Riverlords joined with Lady Mormont and Harry on Karstark, pushing the forward column back into their fellows. It was bloody work, but no northern flags fell. Another call from the perceptive Hornwood heir drew Robb's attention. Grey Wind looked up from the corpse of a knight he dragged from the saddle. The Lannister banner was moving. A desperate knot of men, led by the Kingslayer, forced a way through the umbers, circled around their own rearguard and charged toward Robb. His men moved to intercept, but the Kingslayer was determined. He must have known the battle was nearly lost. Blade met skin, sword met plate, mace met bone. Through it all, the Kingslayer cut down any who approached him until he was within reach of Robb, who was too busy fighting off swordsmen at his feet to move. The cries of men mingled and mixed in a savage choir. In an instant, the Kingslayer was among Robb's guards. The King's guard's blade, gilded and decked in icons, took Lord Karstark's hand and cut through his knee. The shield, proudly announcing Jaime's house, knocked away Eddard's mace, the sword carved out his throat. Darin Hornwood slammed into the Kingslayer's steed. The Golden Knight fell but rolled expertly out from under his mount. With 2 quick steps, he grabbed Darin's wrist, pulled the arm wide and then thrust his sword point into Darin's soft armpit. The Kingslayer turned to seek out Robb again, but the currents of the battle turned against him. Dozens of men stood in his path. He killed another handful before a blow threw out his knee and strong Northmen quickly disarmed him. The Lannister standard fell to the mud. The Westermen began surrendering. Robb knew the battle was over, but the dying was far from finished. Once he was safe among his own ranks, Rob leaped down from his horse. He shoved his way past soldier after soldier, some cheering and some shaking. It was all noise to Rob, who was fixated on the body slumped in its saddle. "Ed," Rob growled, "Ed." He reached up and shook the body of his friend. Ed's corpse slid sideways. Rob barely held his own footing as the body crashed to the mud. "Ed." Rob shook the body again. He looked down, saw the blood run from the single long gash, saw the void in Ed's eyes. Rob heard someone wailing. Not from his own voice, but from Lord Carstark. Ricard writhed in the mud, his arm clutched to his chest, but his eyes and tears were for the body in Rob's arms. Rob turned his head and spied the golden armor being bound with rope. His heart was already thundering, it was instinctual to match the other beat in his mind. His eyes slammed closed as Grey Wind growled and tore across the field. Men yelled and scattered, the slow were shoved away. Jaime Lannister had but a moment to see the beast, before his calf was torn to shreds. On instinct, the Kingslayer raised his other foot and frantically booted the monster's face. Grey Wind let the bloody remains in his mouth go and latched onto the fresh leg instead. The throat next, the wolf thought, the throat next. Rob's connection was startled by another body falling beside him. "No, no, no," Ed, a voice pleaded. Grey Wind paused, ignored the Kingslayer's sobs and turned back. Rob opened his eyes and watched Harry press his hand to Ed's cold cheek. A swarm of Carstark men were putting their lord on a stretcher. Thankfully, Ricard had passed out from the pain. Distantly, Rob remembered telling a passing soldier to send a triage for the Kingslayer. Rob leaned back into Grey Wind and they kept vigil over the body of their foster brother. Then the dawn came. Forward slash forward slash forward slash forward slash forward slash forward slash. He left. Great Jon asked again. The towering man looked like a confused child. His thick brow creased in confusion. An expression matched by the rest of Rob's advisors. They were sitting in the main tent of the northern camp. It had been 2 days since their ambush. Their march continued past Raventree Hall to a well-positioned field north of Riverrun. Standing at the center of the group's attention was a trio of gaunt men. They were each a former prisoner. Men loyal to House Piper who escaped their Lannister captors and were found by Rob's outriders, slowly starving in Pendrick Hills. "Yes, my lords," their spokesman reiterated. "We saw Lord Tywine depart south 5 days ago, just before our escape. He took mostly cavalrymen with him." "Who leads them now?" Harry asked. Rob's friend had done well to shoulder his new burdens, but the bags under his eyes betrayed his fatigue. "Kevan Lannister. He came to speak with Sir Olin near our cells," the spokesman told them. Lord Ryswell sighed, "Without Lord Tywine here, negotiations will be difficult." Rob tapped the arm of his chair, letting the rumble of his men fade into the background. The Great Jon spoke up, "If Tywine's left, then Renly must be close to the capital. Is there a chance Lord Kevan will abandon the siege in exchange for his nephew?" Lady Mormont asked. Lord Marndaly frowned. "I can't imagine any of the Old Lion's commanders would sneeze without his leave. If Kevan agreed to retreat, nothing would stop us from riding down against his brother." Rob stood, silencing the room. Grey Wind stirred and came to his side. "Why give him the option?" Rob wondered. "The Lannisters have not earned a reprieve. Even now, King Joffrey sits on his throne demanding our obedience, calling my father a traitor, while his boars kill the starving small folk inside his walls. If my father is right, they killed Lord Arryn and his son. I say Joffrey Waters has no right to that crown. I will not stand another day while my grandfather, Lord Hoster, who rode to war against the Mad King, is threatened by the cowards who did not stir until the rebellion was all but won." A muted cheer rose from the guards scattered around the tent. "The Westerlands have not moved their armies out of their borders, too worried about the Reach's reserves," Lord Wyman pointed, a gleam in his eye. "We have the advantage, we have the numbers and we have the hearts to win this battle." Smalljan agreed. The cheer rose again with fervor. Rob silenced them. "These cowards believe they can force us to bend the knee. They believe the North will stand idly by when our allies are threatened. They believe they can kill and plunder without consequence." "Well, can they?" "No," was his people's response. "Too long has the lion feasted on fear. They think the rains of Castamere enough to send us pissing in our boots, Rob declared. These Southrons forget the judgment of the Greystocks. They forget the watery grave of Argus 7-star. They forget the fate of every invader to dare cross the neck. Tywin Lannister is an old monster who feeds on pride. Tomorrow, we will take it from him. Rob shouted. People streamed into the tent, drawn by his speech. It felt like the entire army was listening. We will remind the Lannisters why their ancestors feared the kings of winter. Great Jon and Small Jon were red-faced as they bellowed, the Starks in Winterfell. The Mormonts took up the cheer, the North. The Marndaelis rose up in tandem, the young wolf. Swords were drawn and tables beat. Within the crowd they cried out, Brudarhof. Pridebane. An awkward translation, but the name was statement enough. Someone broke out the casks and the official council transformed into a frantic celebration. Even the Riverlords were swept up in the fervor. Rob ignored the drinking and pulled his best strategists to a quiet corner and made ready for their attack. // // // // // // // // The Lannisters were taken by surprise. They had no idea of the Kingslayer's defeat, and their siege camp was split into 3 parts, spread across the Red Fork and the Tumbleton, to better surround the Tully home. Their northern camp was the first to be attacked. Rob's vanguard was led expertly by Lord Galbart Glover. Great Jon had put up a fight for the position until Rob placated him with leading the cavalry. Lord Brax led a sortie across the Tumbleton to aid the other camp. He met a sad end when the Riverrun garrison threw rocks and shot arrows to sink their rafts. Rob committed to his charge in tandem with the Westermen's drowning screams. Their only real resistance was a last-ditch shield wall formed by Kevan Lannister himself. Kevan was no lackwit, his defense was solid and the Lannister soldiers rallied under his direction. It did them no good. Their line repelled one charge, but to their rear, the gates of Riverrun opened. Rob saw the Tully banner raised high as the Lannister line buckled. He was more prepared this time for the killing and the wailing. The mass of bodies moving and shifting around him. He knew Grey Wind was prowling the edge of the battle, the blood hot in his throat. In the eye of the chaos, Rob wondered if his mother was watching from Riverrun's walls. Was she seeing her son kill and maim? Were Arya and Bran seeing their countrymen die? Rob felt simultaneously thrilled, afraid and disgusted. All those emotions churned and mixed in his stomach. His strategy was in motion, with some minor corrections and changes made in the heat of the moment. The soldiers who stood against him were thrown down to the mud or the rivers, and many more were taken prisoner. Across the Red Fork, Rob watched as the last camp was abandoned. The remaining Westermen fled east. They would find no escape. With the camps broken and the siege lifted, the other Riverlords would doubtlessly emerge from their castles, eager to redeem themselves. Great Jon, send someone to Lord Glover. Mop up the rest of them, then establish our own camp, Rob ordered. He was escorted towards Riverrun by his new guards, Lord Marndaelis' sons, Willis and Wendell, Boron Not, and Cranval, and Small Jon, who had demanded to join after Harry On took charge of his household. The drawbridge was filled with the celebrating garrison. One of them must have been present at Winterfell for his grandfather's visit. When Rob crossed the bridge, he was escorted straight through to the castle courtyard. Rob had less than a second to take in the walls before 2 children slammed into his ribs. Bran and Arya, both crying, fat tears dripping over their happy smiles. Rob felt his shoulders crushed by the sheer relief of holding them in his arms. Grey Wind jumped clear over a couple of maids to tackle Summer and Birena. The 3 siblings' joy rebounded between them and was intensified by the direwolves. Green Eyes joined their reunion, and Rob looked up to see his mother sprinting down the castle steps. She was thinner than he remembered, more drawn, with deeper wrinkles. He took her in a firm hug and noticed how much smaller she was than him. Had he grown so much in their time apart? Or was the separation simply making the difference more clear? His mother was crying into his shoulder, thanking all the gods, old and new. Rob knew there was much to be done. The Whispering Wood taught him that the aftermath of a battle lasted twice as long as the fighting. For the moment, he allowed himself to hold his family. He allowed himself to breathe. He had not failed. // It was late evening, and Riverrun's dining hall was filled. Rob's men had been encamped and given extra rations for their bravery. Tomorrow, he and the other lords would oversee the proper treatment of their dead. Rob had asked Lady Mormont to seek out the shepherds among them to officiate the rites. The Stark heir expected to defer to Lord Hoster after arriving. It was his fortress after all. Tearfully, his mother had taken him to his grandfather's bedside. While Hoster was awake and able to thank Rob, the Lord was on his last legs. Shortly after the siege began, Hoster had suffered an apoplexy. According to the Maester, he'd nearly died but rallied after a few weeks. Too weakened to take up his duties, Riverrun's affairs had fallen to Uncle Ed Muir, Caitlin and Uncle Bryndon. Even that orderly structure had now fallen apart. Uncle Ed Muir had been the one to lead the sortie at the end of the battle, against Bryndon and Caitlin's protest. Rob's uncle had comported himself valiantly but overestimated his own skill. An ill-timed thrust had let a Crickehall knight's mace crush his left rib cage. The Maesters had stabilized him, but were unsure if he would last the night. Caitlin stuck to Rob's side all day, helping to make sense of the siege and ensuring there was no confusion between the castle's northern saviors and its inhabitants. To Rob's surprise, there was a Northman already within the walls, who was well acquainted with his family. "And this is Sir Wispin," Caitlin introduced. Wispin shook his head and bowed deeply. "I shall say again, Lady Stark, I am no knight." "A knight indeed if not title," Caitlin firmly countered. "Wispin is one of Lord Bolton's men." Rob frowned. "How did you manage to end up here?" Wispin sat down beside them at the dining table. "I was with Lord Stark and Lord Bolton in King's Landing. When Lord Renly made it clear that we were to remain at his side, I was ordered to slip away. I decided to make for Riverrun, to find your lady mother," Wispin recounted. "We were already surrounded and cut off by that point," Caitlin added. "Imagine our surprise when Uncle Bryndon went down to fish one evening and found a man climbing out of the river." The table laughed and Wispin took the humor graciously. "It's due to Sir Wispin that we knew what was going on with the succession crisis," Uncle Bryndon mentioned. Rob's attention was quickly stolen by Bran, Arya and young Rickon. They demanded he tell them all about the journey south and the battles he fought. Dinner was joyful. The men were grateful to receive something other than rations. Rob relished the opportunity to sleep the night away in a comfortable bed. He awoke to grim news on two fronts. Ed Muir had succumbed to his injuries in his sleep. Caitlin and Uncle Bryndon were heartbroken, and Lord Hoster was unable to properly process the news. Rob's grandfather simply sat there in his sickbed, looking out the window, speaking to people who were not there. He even confused Rob for his predecessor, Catelyn's grandfather, and spoke with fear about some succession dispute with Meagher's ilk. That same day, the body of Kevan Lannister was found trapped beneath his horse on the battlefield. Rob had hoped to gain another hostage, but now aside from a few squires and knights, Jaime Lannister was their only major bargaining chip with the Old Lion. Unfortunately, the timing could not be worse. A swift rider came not 2 days later from Acorn Hall. Lord Smallwood reported Tywin's army was following the Blackwater rush at a fast pace, because King's Landing was under siege. It was unclear if Stannis or Renly was leading the attack. With pressure mounting, Rob made the split-second decision to push forward. He could not allow Tywin to ride to his kin's aid, not when there was a real chance the War of the Three Kings could be put to rest. Now he simply needed to convince his family. /////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////// You'll all be safer at the moat, Rob repeated. I cannot leave Riverrun in this state, Caitlin argued. Out of everyone, Lady Stark looked the part of a war veteran. She had barely allowed herself more than a few hours of rest since Ed Muir's passing. While Uncle Brynden was a capable commander, he'd spent his whole life either on campaign or training for battle, and he had little enthusiasm for running an entire kingdom. Caitlin had stepped up and unofficially taken up the post as Lady of Riverrun. Mother, if things go poorly, there is nothing stopping the Westerlands from putting the Riverlands to the torch. Rob insisted. Send your brothers and sister back to Winterfell, by all means, but I shall remain. Family, duty, honor, Rob. All three demand my presence here. Damn if Rob didn't inherit his stubbornness from her. He scrubbed the sleep from his eyes and sat back in his chair. They were meeting in his grandfather's study. The castle will be fine in Steward Wayne's hands, Rob began. Matters should settle down once Uncle Brynden rallies the rest of the lords. I trust him to keep the border secured. That means you can return to the moat, at least until the battle for King's Landing ends. He was pleading at this point. The last thing he wanted was to force his mother to obey him. A measure of his desperation must have slipped through his face. Your grandfather is not long for this world, Rob, Caitlin whispered. Rob breathed deeply. It was not an unfair request. For a daughter to be at her father's deathbed. Then who will go with the children? Rob asked. Send them with Lord Carstark, his guard is heavy enough. Perhaps Sir Wispin would accept a charge to escort them personally, Caitlin suggested. I mislike trusting a Bolton man with my brothers and sister, Rob replied. They will not be alone, is the point, Rob, Caitlin told him. She was correct. When Hoster passed from this world, someone had to take control of the kingdom. Not an easy mantle to don in the middle of a war. Caitlin and Brynden would need to quickly secure the Riverlands. The hassle of succession could be dealt with after the fact. House Tully would be on the brink of extinction. By all rights, Caitlin would inherit the title of Lady Paramount, but no one was fooled into thinking that the Riverlands would quietly accept her rule. Not when she was married to, and technically loyal to, another Lord Paramount. Rob wondered if Uncle Brynden could be convinced to take the title. It would require the Blackfish to marry and sire a true-born heir, not always a guarantee for men of Brynden's age. With time running out, Rob acquiesced. Bran, Arya and Rickon were bundled up into a heavily armed convoy, much to their protest. Caitlin managed to convince them that Sansa was alone in Winterfell, that she needed their help. It was a testament to the mended relationship between the two Stark daughters, that Arya agreed to return home for Sansa's sake. Rickon was upset to be parted from Caitlin, but Shaggy and Green Eyes managed to calm him down. For Bran, who desperately wanted to stay as a proper squire, it took Brynden commanding him to obey Rob for the message to sink in. Matters were settled, the Riverlands armies were called to muster. When the Northern Army readied itself to depart, Jaime Lannister was left behind in Riverrun's dungeon. A sudden change in weather delayed them, and Rob feared they would arrive too late to stop Tywine from reaching King's Landing. Armored and prepared for the road, Rob gave his mother one last goodbye. I want you to promise me you'll come back, and bring your father with you, Caitlin asked him. Rob frowned. Mother, how can I swear to something like that? Caitlin stared into his eyes. She looked remarkably stark with that stony intensity. Promise me, she said. Rob nodded as he kissed her forehead. I promise. // Notes. Edit. Changed some exposition about the succession of Riverrun. Forgot that daughters could inherit after sons, and not the oldest male relative. /n. As you can tell, I tried to provide some description of the quick campaign in the Riverlands. I didn't see too much reason to deviate from canon for the battles. Although with Edmure not being taken prisoner, some things did change. I always felt that Edmure survived by pure luck anyhow, always seemed like a nice guy though. The young wolf is on the hunt. Rob is now in hot pursuit of Tywine, but the siege of King's Landing has already begun. The Blackwater beckons, and we shall see if the burning stag has it in him to win. Chapter 38, Father's Fear. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. It's been nearly a year since we left Winterfell, Ned commented. By my count, 10 moons, Roose added. Lord Bolton was adjusting Domeric's chainmail, ensuring a tighter fit without the customary wool and furs needed back home. Somehow, young Domeric had hit a growth spurt in their months on the road. The armor he'd brought had been replaced by a set from the Vale Armories. Ned was finishing up a final set of letters. His own suit of armor had been left behind in the capital, presumably forgotten or disposed of by King Joffrey by now. His new set was a personal gift from Sir Vardis Egen, the former captain of Jon Arryn's guard. Sir Egen had returned to the Vale unharmed after escaping King's Landing, and was appointed as the Castellan of the Eyrie until the matter of the ancient seat's ownership could be sorted. While Lord Royce had been selected to lead the Vale in this war, most of the nobles acknowledged that Harold Hardyng was Jon Arryn's legal successor. Hardang's ascension to Lord Paramount would be official once King Joffrey had been deposed. The heir apparent to the Vale was even present in the army. Their temporary tent was opened by a panting Donal Locke. Lords, The catapults have begun their volley. Sir Kyle and Lord Condon await us. Roose took one last look over Domeric's arms and grabbed his own helmet. Ned led them out into the camp, now wide awake and in the midst of movement. The siege itself had begun 2 weeks before. The Vale had cut off the capital and ceaselessly patrolled the roads. Most of the army was positioned north of the city, while another detachment, including Ned and his men, had moved down towards the Gold Road. Outriders made contact with King Stannis' army 10 days ago, when he finally emerged from the Kingswood after fierce fighting. Stannis had ordered that the Vale begin their attack to draw the city's defenders away from the southern walls. The Northmen, alongside House Grafton and Hunter and many others, would make their own assault upon the King's Gate. The very gate they had fought their way out of to escape the city was now their obstacle to returning. Ironic, isn't it? Ricard Roswell had commented. Siege engines had been constructed and sighted, now their engineers were laying boulders and rocks into the battlements. Ned glimpsed men with ladders and a battering ram being pushed to the camp's edge. Energy and apprehension swept between lines, as knights and levies alike readied themselves. Septons with falcon pins were walking among groups of kneeling faithful, delivering prayers and holy blessings. Ned wasn't sure how the faith of the Seven was responding to the war, likely the same way they did the last one, staying out of it. Captains and commanders made last-minute observations and sent runners back and forth. Sir Jalwood Hunter was astride his horse, leading his house in place of his elderly father, and Lord Gerald Grafton's short stature was surrounded by squires and guards. The knot of Northmen was on the farthest edge of the camp, quartered with several minor houses. Where they lacked in singular might, the array of tiny levies had been combined into a sizable reserve force. They were lightly armored and composed of armored footmen and light cavalry. They would support the main wave of soldiers and counter any sorties from the gate. Ned had been given nominal command due to his status. Some of his fellow lords had grumbled and groaned, but had acquiesced quickly. Ned guessed most would prefer he take the blame for any failure or defeat on the field. As the morning bled into afternoon, a distant horn call signaled their attack. Ned watched the soldiers swarm forward and reflected on how Robert might have reacted to a civil war with his brothers, if he sat in Joffrey's place. The reality of such a conflict was unthinkable, but Ned morbidly thought that it might have put some life in his friend's breast. Sieges were dull things by nature, and though Robert much preferred to meet his foes in the field, he retained an intuitive knack for warfare in all forms. The fall of Pike had been his brainchild. The logistics and supply chains were handled by Robert's competent staff, but the placement and timing of the assaults came from the Demon of the Trident. A sizable stone flew from a nearby catapult over the walls and landed deep in the city. Ned was relieved that Robert's body had been escorted to Storm's End by the Silent Sisters. He'd taken a day to visit the tomb before his departure. Even after the rebellion, Ned always assumed he would be there for Robert's funeral. That his brother by oath would fall long before he went grey and be immortalized in a grand tale and legend. What few small folk his men had spoken to relayed that King Robert Baratheon was being fondly remembered as a strong ruler, who brought peace to the kingdoms. That was all. They spoke of his prowess on the field and his triumphs against the Mad King, but even the Greyjoy rebellion had faded from their minds. King Robert had won his throne, defeated the dragons, but little else. The more uncharitable tongues talked of his drinking and his lavish feasting. It was sad, Ned decided, that the Baratheon dynasty was already falling prey to infighting. Joffrey bore the name regardless of his blood and he had to be removed, that was unquestionable, but even all these weeks later, Renly's death sat bitterly in Ned's mind. His opinion of Stannis was not helped by the Red Faith's prominence in his council and staunchest followers. The guards he'd sent to watch over Storm's End's Godswood had fought off a gang of torch-wielding Stormlanders when they approached one evening. Jon Osfarrow had sworn on the seat of Barrowtown that the men had come to burn the Heartree. King Stannis had dismissed the incident as a simple brawl and ordered appropriate punishments for all involved. "The ladders are secured," Lord Condon said. Ned returned his attention to the field. Indeed, the men at the base of the wall were now slowly climbing up and fighting for every inch of space. The battering ram was within sight of the gate, but oil and stones had slowed its progress. "How goes Lord Royce's efforts?" Ned asked. Marek Flint pointed to the northeast, atop one of the towers near the Gate of the Gods. The bronze field of House Royce flew proudly atop the flagpole. Another horn call drew everyone's attention to the south. The war call of King Stannis rang true as his boats landed on the beach in front of the city. The full might of the Stormlands, the narrow sea and a number of reach houses smashed into the already beleaguered defenders. The day dragged on into the evening. Ned and his men rested and prepared. Aside from Rickard Ryswell, Domeric and Mathis Flint, his company were all battle-tested. The momentum seemed to be in their favor. One moment the din of steel and death rang loudly, the next the very air itself moved. A wave of heat from Blackwater Bay hit the entire camp as a spire of green flame shot into the air. Wildfire! Roose yelled. The Northman had no sight on the bay, but he doubted many vessels could survive such an inferno. The fighting men were shocked into a pause, then gradually continued their fighting unabated. Without reinforcement, Stannis' southern force were now running on borrowed time. If the Vale could not breach further into the city, then Stannis was trapped between the water and the wall. A harried band of outriders stormed into their camp. The group of 10 had left an hour past but now only numbered 3. He saw one of them rush down to speak with Lord Grafton, who turned on his heel and began shouting. It only took a few minutes for Ned to realize Grafton's men were turning their backs to the city and forming a line facing the Rose Road. "John O's?" Ned called out. "Yes, Lord Stark." "Take half our footmen and join Grafton's line. Don't ask any questions, just reinforce them," Ned commanded, as he jogged to his horse. With a whistle and wave, Lord Condon, Lord Bolton and the Flints joined him. They rode away from the front line toward a gaggle of Vale nobles arguing and shouting at their squires. "What news?" the Lord of Winterfell demanded. A knight from House Prior spoke quickest. "The Fat Flower is marching on us. The Reachmen are coming." "How many?" Lord Condon asked. No one had a clear answer. The scouts had barely survived their short encounter with the approaching enemy. Ned turned around to take in the state of the siege. If the Tyrells could liberate the King's Gate, they would have a clear path to Stannis on the shores of the Blackwater. Without his reinforcements, the king would be crushed against the city walls. "We must hold here," Ned said. "Are you mad?" a Valuman exclaimed. "Lord Stark is right." The voice of reason belonged to none of the minor lords arrayed before Ned, but to a man with a short pointed bear and a hawkish nose bedecked in the black and yellow of House Templeton. "What are you doing here, Sir Simond?" Lord Grafton asked. "The bay is aflame. Lord Royce ordered I take my men to reinforce the king," Sir Simond explained. "Although now it seems we must join the fight here. If the Tyrells come to save the Lannisters, we must hold them until the city is taken." "How can we?" a lordling wondered. Ned frowned, stiffened his face and spoke clearly. "Any way we can. Forward slash 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 forward slash." It took less than 2 hours for the torches and banners of House Tyrell to appear in the distance. Their time had been short and the siege still demanded the attention of the majority of their forces. It fell to Ned and the minor lords he could marshal to cobble together some kind of defense. Domeric Bolton came up with the idea to strip down the tents and parts of their fortifications and create a makeshift picket line to blunt the enemy's cavalry. The military acumen of the other commanders swiftly placed their troops and what cavalry could be secured into a passable formation, though their chances were grim. There was no call for negotiations, and no announcing of intentions. The Reachmen arrived, organized and marched forward. Thankfully, it seemed their army was not the full strength of the kingdom but a well-armed vanguard. Their knights were plentiful but a lack of bows helped to even the field. A flash of crimson had him cursing aloud. Beside the ranks of the Tyrells was the Lannister banner. Not in great numbers, but a sizable group, broke forward eager to tear into his line. Ned prayed that Roose would be able to hold the lions on the far flank. Commands became shouts and hoarse screams as the two sides met. The Tyrells couldn't stray too far or else risk drawing in the rest of the Vale's army. Ned had sent a handful of messengers to the High Lords warning of the attack. Good fortune would see reinforcements arrive. Quickly, Ned too was drawn into the fight. From horseback he led his men and horsemen to harry and bleed the Reachmen that fell out of cohesion, forcing them into tighter and tighter groups. They prevented the enemy from spreading out and enveloping them. Until one of the Flints spied Roose's line buckling. Ned watched the mountain that rides Cleaver Vale Knight in half. His massive sword was nothing short of a wheat scythe when wielded from the saddle. Lord Tywine had no doubt sent his most vicious riders to accompany his favourite monster. Ned knew he had little chance against Lord Clegane. Nevertheless, as he arrayed for a charge into the mountain and his men, a clear horn rang out behind them. Sir Simond smiled broadly. "Lord Royce has not forgotten us. That is the banner of House Redfort." Bolstered, Ned roared and sent his men forward. It was dark and just seeing where to plant his blade was a challenge. Flashes of anger and pain drew Ned's mind to more. The wolf had kept away from the thick melee, wary of being attacked by enemies or allies. Instead, Ned's companion was careful to only attack lone soldiers and the occasional rider. Something about one voice caught Ned's ear through the cacophony of battle. It was familiar to him and Moore heard it as well. "Father!" Yanking hard on his reins, Ned shoved his horse through the crowd breaking out to the rear. John O'Sfarrow and a scant few Stark guards managed to follow him. He came into the clearing between his army and the walls of the city just in time to see the mountain that rides pull his steel from Roose Bolton's guts. Without pausing, the mountain kicked his steed forward and the Lannister knights who could, followed him towards the Blackwater. The scream had come from Domeric. The boy had lost his steed and stumbled forward to the fallen corpse of his father. Ned took a moment to breath and collect himself. Now was not the time to let emotions rule him. Ned turned back to the wider battle. The Reachmen had nearly pushed through their defense, but the Redforts and what appeared to be Arryn men had tipped the scales in their favor. The Tyrell men had not died easily. Ned would need to prepare for the northern casualties. There would be many. A great cheer echoed out of the city, beginning far in the distance and creeping outward like a tidal wave. The burning stag flew above the Mudgate. "King Stannis has won," Jon O's remarked. Ned focused back on Domeric and saw for a moment himself in reflection, when a letter from King's Landing tore his heart in two. Without a reply, Ned dismounted and knelt next to the new Lord Bolton. He laid an arm around the young man's shoulders, the same way Jon Arryn had done for him. Even in victory, the Iron Throne always took its price. Notes. A /n, the fic is not dead. Here's a shorter chapter to prove it. Battle scenes are hard, I love having them but hate writing them. That's why rather than try and write an entire Battle of the Blackwater, I chose to focus on a small, manageable part of it. Send some resources on how to write actual battles if you have them. Roose has died and now Domeric has to shoulder a lot of expectations and responsibilities. I'm not completely decided on where the new Lord Bolton's life will lead. What are your thoughts? Stannis has taken King's Landing, concluding the War of the Three Kings, but is it really over? We'll find out. Chapter 39, A Bloody Sunrise. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. The city stank. Hours after the fighting had ended, the fires that briefly raged through Flea Bottom were extinguished. Ash and gore remained behind to smolder and rot. The morning sun warmed piles of corpses heaped outside the city gates. The Vale and Stormlanders were being arranged for burial, while the city's defenders were dumped in large piles. Ned was able to have the northern dead separated from the masses. He presided over a small service and arranged for their grave sites. The emols of his fallen men were distributed to their liege lords, to be returned to family and friends. A messenger came around noon, bringing orders from the king. Ned and his vassals were escorted to the Red Keep to swear their oaths anew before the Iron Throne. Ned was relieved that King's Landing was in better condition than the Lannisters had left it during the rebellion. The Vale army had kept close to the walls, fighting and capturing the gates and towers while Stannis had pierced through the defences at the Mudgate then marched straight to the Red Keep. It was unclear how the king entered the castle. The Red Keep's gate was singed but unbroken and no other breaches were easily seen. Perhaps a turncoat. A fearful Crownlander who thought to gain clemency by opening the way to the new ruler of Westeros. The fighting had not been easy inside. Pools of blood stained the floors and walls, with the occasional discarded sword. Servants scurried back and forth, watched by men in burning stag livery. Stannis was already cementing the Red Keep as a stronghold, no doubt he'd have the entire staff replaced soon enough. Worryingly, a strong smell of smoke drifted down the larger passageways. The northern lords slowed their steps. It was coming from the throne room. Forward slash 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 forward slash. Lions and roses were burning. Flags and banners only, thankfully. Stannis watched over his bonfire, perched upon the massive throne, still dressed in his armor. He was a beacon of red and yellow amongst twisted steel and long cold iron. On his brow was a crown of crimson gold, shaped into the rising points that flowed like flames. 7 red gems had been inserted along the rim. Davos Seaworth, the newly instated Hand of the King, stood near the dais giving out strict orders to ranks of lords and knights. One by one, groups filed out heading for the corners of the Crown lands to consolidate Stannis' hold on his new domain. The gifts and favors would come later, but at no great speed. Each man would have to prove their worth for Stannis to consider any kind of generosity. Presetting, Lord Eddard Stark, Warden of the North. A page announced. Stannis looked away from the crackling wood and motioned them forward. "Speak of your battle, Lord Stark," Stannis said. A quick summarization of their part in the siege ended with the news of Lord Bolton's death and the unfortunate fate of Rickard Ryswell. "Captured by the Tyrells?" Stannis repeated. "Yes, Your Grace," Ned answered. "Multiple men saw Lord Ryswell knocked from his horse as you conquered the city. Soldiers bearing the Golden Rose took him as they retreated. I expect a ransom to be sent from Highgarden soon enough." Stannis leaned back, resting his gauntlets on the throne arms, apparently unconcerned by the blades and rust. "If I may ask, Your Grace, how did you take the Red Keep so swiftly?" Lord Condon spoke. "With little resistance," the king replied. "From what the servants say, Cersei ordered the garrison to reinforce the outer walls. Those left behind were quick to fold under my might. A strange order, but perhaps Cersei had been desperate and out of sorts." What was the fate of Cersei Lannister? What of her children? Ned wondered if golden shrouds would be dragged into the room. Were small corpses once again blessing the crowning of a new king? Stannis frowned, his teeth gnashed. Seaworth stepped forward and spoke in his stead. "Cersei Lannister, along with her sons Joffrey and Tommen Hill, have disappeared. Of the small council, Grand Maester Pycelle has been imprisoned, but Lord Varys and Lord Baelish are likewise missing," the smuggler informed them. "What of Myrcella Hill?" Ned asked. "She was sent to Dorne before the siege. House Martell has the girl." "We shall see what they want in exchange for her," Queenslis said as she emerged from a side entrance. The Red Priestess on her heels. "We are not completely without prisoners," Seaworth continued. "Tyrion Lannister was captured during the battle. He's unconscious from wounds taken outside the Mudgate, but his squire was willing to reveal what he knew in exchange for his lord's life." Ned absorbed the news, re-evaluating the pieces at play. Morrick Flint leaned forward. "What of the Kingsguard, Your Grace?" "Sir Trant and Swan are missing. Isokurt is in Dorne at the former princess' side. The others died in the fighting," Stannis informed them. "Even Sir Barristan?" Lord Flint asked. Stannis sneered. "Joffrey Hill saw fit to dismiss Barristan the Bold. I've been unable to locate him. He may have fled the Prince of Tongue's anger across the sea." "Will you finally appoint your own Kingsguard, Your Grace?" Sewin put forward. Ned had initially wondered at the order's absence once they'd taken Storm's End. Renly had been all too eager to form his Rainbow Guard. Seaworth had remarked that King Stannis did not want a Kingsguard, he wanted the Kingsguard. "That shall be discussed at a later time," Queenslis replied. The Red Priestess was staring at Ned. Her gaze was intensely uncomfortable. The men in his company had always felt unnerved by her, though a few found the woman's mystique alluring. He wished more had accompanied him, but the wolf was taking a well-deserved rest back at their camp. "The Queen is correct. Matters of my guard can be considered later. At the moment, I have a task for you, Lord Stark," Stannis commanded. Ned bowed. "We are at your service. My remaining enemies must be brought to heel. The Tyrells are retreating to Highgarden, while Tywin Lannister roams the Riverlands. We've found evidence amongst the former Grand Maester's letters that Lord Lannister was planning to abandon the siege of Riverrun to reinforce King's Landing. I want you and your men to accompany a force from the Vale and hunt down the Old Lion before he can retreat back to the Westerlands." "I shall make ready to leave at once," Ned agreed. Stannis stood from his throne and descended. Also, I would have you send for your family. Princess Shireen is on her way from Storm's End and one of your daughters would make a fitting lady-in-waiting. The king did not propose Ned leave one of his daughters south, he expected it. Now was not the time to push back, not when King Stannis stood on the apex of his victory. My wife and I would be honored, Ned said. It took 3 days for the Northmen to secure enough supplies and horses for their journey. Ned coordinated with Lord Redfort and Hunter to take the Gold Road and hopefully reach the southern border of the Riverlands quickly. A week into their march, a messenger met them bearing news from the Stony September. Tywin Lannister was coming south with all haste. His army had tried to break west to the Golden Tooth, presumably after learning of the Battle of the Blackwater. The River Lords had rallied and fought pitched skirmishes with the Old Lion up and down the Red Fork to deny him a passage through the fords. Rumor had it that the young wolf was on the hunt and gaining on Tywin with every hour. When Ned asked about news from the Reach, the messenger said that infighting had erupted. The Florents, Tarlis, Fossways and Oakmonts had raised their banners for King Stannis. The Tyrells were locked away in their castle with a supposedly wounded Garland Tyrell on his deathbed. The high towers had not stirred and the red wines were likewise silent. Ned hoped the Reach could be brought into the king's peace with little bloodshed. Westeros would need every scrap of grain in the coming years. Their army continued on, veering off the Gold Road and crossing the Blackwater Rush before it split at Three Swords and Tumblers Falls. Soon enough, the Vale scouts report sightings of the Lannister army. The Red Cloaks were past Rushing Falls, making a straight path south along Straight Sword tributary, right for them. // This clash in the Riverlands would be remembered as the Lion Hunt. For all his ruthless and unforgiving reputation, let no one call Tywin Lannister a simpleton. With Robb Stark and the River Lords at his back, the Old Lion took the news of the Vale and Stark men standing in his way with deadly seriousness. He ordered his army to divide in two. Each half marched against one of Tywin's foes while the main cavalry moved quickly back and forth in search of an opening in the battle lines. Demoralized but loyal, the Red Cloaks took the full brunt of the oncoming armies. The southern force broke quickly, turning from a shield wall into a mass of fleeing men. That route was another of Tywin's plans. Ned and his allies could not easily pursue the Lord of the Westerlands with the army fleeing in front of them, lest they be attacked from behind by a rallied force. Robb and the Blackfish were likewise stymied. Once finally clear of the Westermen, the Lords fruitlessly prowled the hills all the way east to the God's Eye. They found many stragglers and captured their fair share of knights, nobles and squires, but their prey had escaped by the skin of his teeth. How Lord Tywin made it back to Casterly Rock, none of the loyal lords knew. Though some said that the Old Lion had never been in the battle to begin with. He had slipped away from his army when he realized the trap was nearly sprung. Crossing one of 100 tiny, unnamed fords under cover of night in disguise. Ned's part in the War of Three Kings came to a close that day, on the banks of the God's Eye, staring out across the calm waters at the mysterious Isle of the Faces with Moore by his side. The island was a bulwark of red reflected in the turquoise lake. Ned had stood on the opposite shore, within sight of Harrenhal, almost a year ago, when he came south with his friend and king, searching for answers, for justice. He reflected again on the mystery of the island. Were there shepherds there? Some deeper, greater truth that a holy place revealed to only the special few visitors. Ned was sorely tempted to commandeer a boat and find out for himself. War, death and chaos laid behind and ahead, yet the Isle remained. Was that its greatest power? To move through time unchanged when the rest of the world waxed and waned. Moore twitched and turned back, standing still only for a breath before bounding forward past the Stark guards. Elation and relief bubbled up Ned's throat. He spun on his heels and likewise marched at a quick pace, moving through the ranks of men setting up camp, all the way to the far edge of the army, where a group of riders watched two massive beasts collide. Not in anger or bites but in affection. Robb was among them. He leapt from his horse and surged into Ned's arms. His son was here. Alive. Breathing. Ned's tears of relief dripped down to Robb's hair. The young man's height nearly matched his own. Rob had grown, probably more than in just body. "Father," Rob was likewise lost for words. "You have made me so proud," Ned said instead. Taking a second to breathe, Rob stepped back and turned to his companions. Ned went forward and greeted the loyal lords, giving each a personal thanks. Many demurred, speaking only of their duty and gladness to fight once more for his family. Great Jon and Lord Marndaly had nothing but praise for Rob. The mountain clansmen were ecstatic to speak of his son's courage, his prowess on the field. They all had no end of praise for Brudarhof, for the young wolf. Harry on Karstark was somber as he explained the death of his younger brother, Ned's namesake, and the wounds dealt to Lord Karstark. Ned imagined Rob was not looking forward to his betrothed's grief at the loss of her brother. Time would tell if Lord Karstark would recover in full. Harry on might be pressed into taking on more and more duties in the meanwhile. Some thought should be put to his marriage. Harry on had thus far avoided a betrothal. No doubt his father was waiting for the most advantageous match before committing. "Tell me, are your siblings well?" "What of your mother?" Ned asked. Rob rubbed his face. By now they should have reached Moat Cailin. Mother remained at Riverrun. She refused to leave grandfather's side. Ned understood Caitlyn's desire, but it also meant another day separated from her. An ache he could not get rid of. He looked over Rob's head, finally realizing something was amiss. "Where's Jon?" The battle-tested commander that was his son, blushed and glanced down at his toes. "Rob, where is your brother?" "In the north," Rob mumbled. Ned resisted the urge to growl. "Why did he not come with you?" "He was already gone by the time the ravens arrived from King's Landing," Rob explained. "He was venturing into the gift." "What could he possibly be doing there?" Rob glanced around, ensuring no one was in earshot. He leaned and whispered, "Finding the three-eyed crow. // // / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / / // Notes. /n, another shorter chapter. Finally we have wrapped up the southern affairs in this arc. We'll be rewinding a bit in the next chapter to follow Jon and the shepherds as they head into the new gift and beyond the wall. A quick summarization of the end of the War of Stags, mostly because I didn't see a real need to drag out the proceedings. The gist of it is that Stannis now holds the crown, Cersei and her children are missing, Varys and Littlefinger are similarly MIA, Tywin Lannister is on the lam and the Reach is now in turmoil. I need time to decide how that will all shake out, but now we get to see what Jon Ghost Stark is up to. Chapter 40, A Frozen Sunset. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Jon knelt low, he ensured his legs shifted as little grass as possible. Wrapped in his tan cloak he did his best to blend in with the vegetation around him. He looked down from the hilltop, watching a trio of deer mill around a pond. "Now watch carefully," Val whispered from beside him. "I know how to hunt," Jon replied. "Sure, my Vicholf, you know how to hunt like a lordling." Val's arrow flew straight and fast, slamming straight into the animal's neck, almost going clean through. The buck staggered into the water, took a few frantic steps, then dropped into the pond, shocking the other deer into running off. Jon frowned. "You're just unnaturally good." Val dropped a kiss on his cheek, then cheerfully trotted toward her prey. Of course, as a proper gentleman, Jon trussed up the corpse and dragged it back to their camp. The new gift was depressing. It took Jon a few days to appreciate the haunting beauty of its abandoned landscape. Abandoned was really the most operative word for the gift. After leaving Umberlands, Jon had expected to reach their first village within the week until they found the Tower of Queen's Crown and its surroundings empty. Unfortunately, when they doubled back, the next town, marked on the map he'd received at last, Hearth, was abandoned. The next one was half burnt. The one after that didn't even exist. Marie found half a shed sunken into the mud. The settlement had been swallowed by some winter storm decades ago. Jon was surprised then, when he spotted 6 people standing with Marie and Born around their horses. "Jon!" Marie called out. Ghost and Crag were prowling a ways off. They'd kept themselves sated on nearby rabbits and were circling back. "Greetings," Jon directed to the newcomers. They were dressed sparingly in thick furs, but the abundance of cloth and wool marked them as northerners. There were 4 men and 2 young women. The 2 oldest men had thin grey beards and were watching Jon with some mixture of skepticism and amazement. One carried an axe but the other had a weathered sword at his waist. A younger man leaned forward. Is that him then? The old men glanced at each other and nodded. They might even be twins, John thought. He's got the look of Lord Ricard, but my memory isn't what it used to be, the one with the sword remarked. John stepped forward, drawing himself up. He ignored Val's snickering. I am John Gostock, son of Lord Eddard Stark, he declared. That set their visitors chattering. The twin with the sword, the most confident of the group, stepped forward. My name is Leaf, my brother and I are farmers nearby. We noticed your camp yesterday and you obviously aren't a band of wildlings. Leaf threw a quick glance at the mask attached to John's waist. What are you doing so far from the King's Road, Lord Gostock? By order of King Robert, the new gift is being returned to the ownership of the North. I've been granted these holdings by my father, John explained. Leaf's eyes widened. What does that mean for us? Right now? As far as I can tell, nothing. We don't even know how many people still live in the gift now, John explained. Very few. We trade with a few farmsteads and I know there's cattle herders farther east. In our grandfather's time there were still villages, even a good-sized town off the road to last Hearth. Leaf told them. There's not much to be a lord of, I'm afraid. My father and I have plans for that, John replied. The gift is too important to be left so fallow. What about the wildlings? Leaf's twin asked. John glanced north before asking, how have the raids been this past year? That brought the farmers up short. It was one of the women who spoke up first. They've been quiet, I think only one in the past 10 moons. John was hesitant to reveal too much. The people of the gift had a complicated history with the free folk. Things are changing, he settled on. They exchanged a few more words. Leaf was kind enough to update John's map. The younger folk, who he learned were not Leaf's grandchildren but a collection of orphans he'd taken in over the years, were able to point out where the most well-known ruins in the gift were. The kind of places that had been seats of power, with grim legends and haunted stories. Though there were plenty of holdfasts and towers in the gift, John and his group had passed 2 before leaving the King's Road. They simply lacked the proper resources and defenses to build and expand. For a masterly house, enough space to build their walls, stable and storehouse was perfect. A true lordly house requires more. The capacity to house their men-at-arms, to hold large councils, withstand a siege and shelter the people during winter. None of those ruined forts felt equipped for those roles. John took out 5 silver stags from his pouch. For your help, Leaf, it does not go unappreciated. The older man took it graciously. It was no burden, Lord Gostock. I hope to live long enough to see your banner fly across our fields. They parted ways a few hours before dusk and continued on. With a concrete direction, Bourne led them west, towards the mountains. Unlike what the great maps of the Citadel would tell you, the border between Brandon's gift and the new gift wasn't well defined. Mayor Stillowin realized that according to King Jaehaerys' royal decree there was no separation at all. The gift had just been extended by 25 leagues. Meaning King Robert's revoke of the decree had technically given John rule over the entire gift, everything except the wall itself. A mistake John could only infer was caused by Lord Arryn's sudden decline. John and his father doubted the Night's Watch would be happy with a legal loophole taking away their autonomy. Instead, their compromise was that everything north of Mole's Town would remain under the Watch's authority. It was a sad fact that the Brotherhood did not have the resources or manpower to contest the Starks' decision if they disagreed with it. Val turned to Marie and asked, any sign of a Godswood, Skytongue? Marie paused and looked up to the rapidly darkening sky. Her eyes turned misty between one blink and the next. Yes, close by, nestled next to a small river, she declared. Her birds were faster scouts than any man on horseback. It was rare that Marie missed anything under the open sky. Bourne adjusted their course to follow the sounds of water rushing over stone. A humble godswood with no heart tree grew from a moist patch of soil led into a hill. Marie's birds were already there, snacking on berries and worms they'd drudged up. There was thick enough cover for a camp that night. While the rest of them prepped the elk for dinner, Marie wandered over to the thickest tree trunk and laid down with one hand on the roots. Wake me when it's ready, Marie asked as she nodded off. Bourne rolled his eyes. I wish she would at least help get the tents set up before dreaming. Marie was certain that their next clue to finding the three-eyed crow would come by communing with the old gods. Every night that she could, she would put herself into a trance and reach out for other green seers. Seeking out others was a new concept to John. Bourne said it was exceedingly rare. There were few green seers who could actively shape their own dreams. Marie was convinced it was a matter of time before she saw their next step clearly. Val was of the opinion that things were fine as they were. She was under the open sky, got to hunt and travel below the wall without being killed, and had her husband to warm the furs at night. "When you become a lord, what does that mean for me?" she asked that night by the river. John looked at her. The bright blonde hair he loved so much was washed by the low coals of the campfire. "Well," he started, "if you're willing, I'd marry you in front of the heart tree of Winterfell. I'd put my cloak around your shoulders so that my people will know I chose you, the same way your people know you chose me." Val smiled wide. "What about these ruins you're looking for? Doesn't that mean your father will build a castle for you?" That's the plan. From my new seat, I'll have to begin settling people here, get the farms and towns built, and figure out customs and taxes. It's going to take a long time, probably my whole life," John said. "Do you think there's a place for a free folk spearwife in your Neela castle?" Val asked. John knew that if Val stayed with him and found life unsatisfying, she'd leave. She'd return to her sister without looking back. "I think that if anyone wants to be the lady of the gift, they'll have to be prepared for a wild land, with wild people." John leaned over and cupped Val's cheek. "She'll need to be strong and able to handle the duties that fall onto her." Val hesitated. What if such a woman didn't want such responsibility? Didn't want people to kneel to her? Then a lord would have to be happy with whatever time his lady gave him, John told her. Val's eyes widened, then she turned over, nestled back into him and promptly went to sleep. John rarely made Val speechless, so he took it as a victory. // // // // // // // // // // // // The mountains of the gift were different from the ones on Skagos. They were larger for one, and they began as steady inclines climbing up and up. Bourne's home island was basically one giant peak. Along the very edge of the old mountains, where even the clans had abandoned, was their destination. Bourne looked from the snow-capped peaks down to the ancient walls they were riding towards. Marie's trio of birds circled above while Ghost and Crag kept alert for danger. Val and John were following a goat path around the old structure. "That's it." Marie snorted. "That's it," Bourne snidely replies. "I tell you, we're about to visit a castle older than White Harbor, with who knows how many artifacts hidden inside, and all you can say is that's it." "Not all of us spent hours sitting with the elders instead of doing chores," Marie shot back. Bourne couldn't help but mutter, "Not all of us were allowed to sit at father's knee instead of doing chores." Marie glared at him as he urged his horse forward. The stone-cut walls were rough and worn down. Without a caretaker, the mountain snows buried this place each winter. Still, Bourne could trace the perimeter of a half-circle that started at a high cliff and rounded up the north side to a steep craggy hill. There were a few large gaps where the ground had slouched and sunk. Still water ponds fed by a steady raindrop from broken cobblestone dotted the grass and gravel by the foot of the walls. There were a few strong streams away south fed from the mountains. Some features had lived through the storms and sunshine. Behind the walls were stone huts built like domes. Only 4 or 5 remained standing, and he was stretching the definition for them. A few were narrow and tall, like beehives, and others were wide and squat with grass and moss crawling over them. Bourne had guessed that the landmark was old. Nearly everything this far north was. The domes were a surprise though. Their insides were almost barren except for mud-caked bronze fixtures attached to the roof and frozen in the ground. He noticed Crag and Ghost sniffing around the tall mound nestled into the back of the grounds, gripped tight to the cliff face. There was a thick carpet of vegetation growing over it. It was peculiar. The hill would have been reserved for the Lord's Hall, but there was not a single wall or stone left there, simply plants. Bourne went out through a gap in the wall to find his companions. Val had wandered farther uphill to investigate a trio of smaller stone structures. Cones, large enough for a person to sit inside. There were no visible openings, only a set of runes carved into the sides. Bourne only made out the inscription after walking closer. "Hold on," Val. Bourne warns, "read the rune." "It says keep safe," she remarked. "I thought it was some kind of grave." "It's probably something valuable, but those extra marks along the top and bottom alter the meaning." Keep safe from others becomes keep safe for others. Bourne explains, it's used for warning about dangerous things. A shepherd built these. You think whatever is buried in these things is cursed? Val asked. Perhaps, Bourne said. He went back to his horse and pulled a wrap of boiled linen out and wrapped it across his mouth and nose and pulled a small kit out of his camping supplies. When he returned, John and Marie had joined Val in examining the cairns. Let's see what kind of curse we've found, Bourne said. Carefully gripping one of the flat rock sheets, he pulled it out of the wall, waiting to see if the whole structure collapsed. Bourne lit a small candle and held it up to the opening. No bad air. He then peered into the